Manipulation, the birth of dark psychology. Some people don't raise their voices to control you. They lower them. They don't hit you. They make you doubt yourself. That's the power of manipulation. It doesn't look like power. It looks like love. It feels like care, but it quietly pulls your thoughts away from you, one string at a time. Manipulation is not a new idea. It existed long before we gave it a name. Before psychology books, before therapy rooms, people were already mastering the subtle art of control. You've seen it. Maybe you've felt it. That strange guilt when you say no. That confusion after a conversation that should have been simple. That hesitation that whispers, maybe I'm the problem. That's not just emotion, that's design. Dark psychology was born from this hidden world, not in textbooks, but in broken homes, offices, schools, and relationships. It is the intentional use of emotional patterns to influence, weaken, and control. The mind, at its core, seeks connection. It wants to trust. It wants to believe. And manipulators, they know this, they feed that need, and then they twist it. Some people learn this behavior because it's how they survived. They grew up watching silence win arguments. They saw how guilt could get them what they wanted. Others, they're simply wired differently. They lack the discomfort most people feel when causing pain. They don't wonder if they're being unfair. They wonder if they're being effective. It doesn't make them monsters, it makes them dangerous. Take Rebecca. She's 34, works in New York. To her team, she's sweet but scattered. She forgets appointments. She misplaces files. She always needs help. But behind that helplessness is something calculated. She's mastered what's called strategic incompetence. By appearing incapable, she avoids responsibility. And others, wanting to be kind, take on her work. Over time, they carry her load. She keeps the credit. Then there's Mike from California. He's kind, thoughtful, a great listener. He remembers your favorite coffee, your dog's name, your dreams, but he also knows how to use that information. Once he gains your trust, he begins to guide your decisions, subtly, slowly, until you're saying yes to things you once questioned, until your voice feels smaller, and if you resist, he doesn't fight, he pulls away, just enough to make you chase. That's not care, that's control. And these people, they rarely scream, they don't need to. They already live inside your thinking. The most effective manipulators are not loud. They're patient. They study weakness. They memorize your responses. And they test boundaries until yours disappear. What makes manipulation terrifying isn't just what it does. It's that it doesn't feel like manipulation while it's happening. You think you're overreacting. You blame your sensitivity. You explain their behavior to yourself. And by the time you see it clearly, you're already tangled. That's how manipulation works. Not with force, but with confusion, not with threats, but with silence, not with chains, but with guilt. When someone uses your empathy against you, when they use your fears, your dreams, your kindness as tools, they are not being emotional, they are being tactical. This is the foundation of dark psychology. It's not evil because it's violent, it's evil because it's quiet, because it feels safe, until it doesn't. Most people never notice the shift. One day, you trust them. And slowly, you stop trusting yourself. That's the first sign, when your own voice sounds smaller in your head than theirs, when your gut says something's wrong, but your mind has been taught to ignore it. The manipulator doesn't break you all at once. They wear you down, one unseen cut at a time. They rarely take responsibility, not because they don't know what they're doing, but because they've trained you to carry the blame. You apologize first, you explain more, you adjust over and over again, and they just watch. Some manipulators use affection, some use guilt, some use silence, but the tool doesn't matter, the intention does, and that intention is always about control. You begin to hesitate before speaking. You start editing your words mid-sentence. You seek their approval for simple things. You fear upsetting them, not because they yell, but because they withdraw, because they make you feel like you broke something. And every time that happens, you give up a little more of yourself, not by force, but by choice, a choice you've been trained to make. This is how behavioral patterns are formed, and manipulators understand that repetition is the most powerful form of conditioning. One reaction, repeated enough times, becomes a rule inside your head. I shouldn't say that. I'll just do it their way. It's easier if I stay quiet, and that's when they know they've succeeded, when your silence does the work for them. This is where mental awareness becomes your weapon. Not strength, not confrontation, just awareness, noticing the pattern, seeing the strategy and realizing this is not love, this is not care, this is emotional abuse wrapped in softness. Dark psychological tactics don't always feel dark at first. They feel familiar because many of us grew up around subtle control in families, in school, even in culture. So when someone starts doing it in adulthood, it doesn't raise alarms. It just feels normal. But normal doesn't mean healthy, and familiar doesn't mean right. That's why emotional intelligence is critical. It helps you name what you're feeling. It helps you pause before reacting. It helps you separate guilt from responsibility. There's a term called gaslighting. It's when someone makes you question your own memory, perception, or sanity. They don't deny facts. They twist them. They don't scream lies. They deliver them with calm smiles. They don't make you feel wrong. They make you unsure. And that uncertainty, that fog, that's where the real manipulation lives. The goal isn't to win an argument. The goal is to make you stop trusting yourself, so they never have to argue again. Gaslighting isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a gentle, "Are you sure that happened?" Maybe you misunderstood. You're too sensitive. Just enough doubt to make you rewrite reality. This is not about being weak. Even the strongest minds fall for this, because manipulation doesn't attack your logic. It attacks your emotion, it rewires your trust, and it disguises harm as connection. You don't need to be perfect to avoid it. You just need to be aware, to slow down your reaction, to notice the small moments where your boundaries are bending, and to ask, is this how respect feels? In the next few chapters, we'll uncover how these techniques evolve. But first, you need to know this. If someone makes you feel like your clarity is the problem, they're not confused, they're in control. They don't take your freedom in one move. They take your choices, then your voice, then your sense of what's real. And by the time you notice, it feels too late to leave. Not because they've trapped you, but because you no longer trust your ability to stand without them. This is how psychological tricks replace open control. They don't tie your hands. They train your mind to comply, to please, to stay. And that's why recognizing dark psychology matters, not just to understand others, but to protect yourself. Your mental strength isn't about how loud you speak, it's about how clearly you see, how calmly you say no, and how deeply you know the difference between love and control, because they do look similar. In the beginning, both are attentive, both want your time, both ask for closeness, but one gives you space to breathe. The other slowly takes your air away. You may still think, maybe I'm just overreacting. That's the voice manipulation leaves behind. That whisper that questions your own intuition. But intuition is your first line of defense, not fear, not suspicion, just the quiet feeling that something is off, even if it can't yet be explained. The more you ignore that voice, the easier you are to control. But the more you listen, the less power they have over you. You don't have to fight them. You don't need to expose them. You don't even have to explain yourself. You just need to see the pattern and step out of it. It might be slow, it might hurt, but it's the first step back to your own mind. Because the most powerful freedom is the freedom to trust yourself again. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the mind and understand why some people fall into manipulation more easily than others, and how the brain, under the weight of emotional control, starts to rewrite what it believes. But for now, just breathe. You don't need all the answers yet. You just need this one truth. If something doesn't feel like safety, it isn't love. And if it makes you doubt your worth, it isn't you, it's manipulation. Now, let's understand another major thing. How it actually works on people. And why the mind falls for manipulation. Not everyone becomes a victim because they are weak. Some fall because they were taught to doubt themselves early. Some fall because they're kind. And some because they were never shown what real love feels like. The human mind is not designed for constant defense. It craves connection. It seeks safety. And that's what makes it vulnerable. You don't question someone when they say they love you. You don't doubt a friend who says they're looking out for you. You want to believe it because belief feels better than fear. That's where manipulation begins. In your hope, not your weakness. The brain operates on patterns. It looks for repetition. It saves energy by trusting what feels familiar. So if manipulation looks like something you've seen before, even something painful, it won't raise alarms. It'll feel like home, especially if home was built on walking on eggshells. This is why people who were raised around emotional abuse often don't see it coming, not because they're blind, but because their brain calls it normal. Manipulators don't always rush, they build slowly. First, they praise, then they question, then they correct, and eventually, they rewrite who you are. You may not notice when it begins. It may feel like someone helping you improve. They point out your flaws, they give feedback, they offer advice, always with a smile. But over time, that advice becomes the only voice you hear. And your own voice, it grows quiet. You become dependent, not because you want to, but because they've trained you to be. They create the wound, then offer themselves as the cure, and the cycle feeds itself. Think about Sarah. She's 28 from Ohio. In her relationship, everything started with kindness, daily messages, thoughtful gestures, support in hard times. But slowly, things shifted. Her choices were questioned. Her friends made her anxious. Her job was too demanding. And soon, her world got smaller, all in the name of love. But that wasn't love. It was slow erasure. She didn't see it at first because he never shouted. He simply worried too much. He loved her too deeply. And her brain, shaped by early insecurity, mistook control for care. Then there's David, 42, divorced. He grew up with a narcissistic father who controlled the entire household. So when his new partner started making every decision for them both, he didn't protest. He felt relief. Decision-making triggered anxiety for him, and someone else taking control felt familiar, almost soothing. But the longer he stayed, the less of himself remained, not because she was evil, but because she used his wounds against him, and he didn't even notice. That's how dark psychological tactics often work. They don't force. They fill voids. They find the cracks inside you, the doubts, the loneliness, the fear of abandonment, and they pour themselves in like concrete. At first, it feels like strength. Later, you realize you've been buried. The mind wants simplicity. It wants to trust. So when someone offers answers, even controlling ones, we accept because confusion is exhausting, and clarity, even false clarity, feels like peace. But peace that costs your independence isn't peace. It's quiet submission. The truth is, some people are trained to serve others emotionally, to ignore their own needs, to always ask, am I doing enough? And manipulators see that and use it. They don't need to break you. They just need to make you believe you're only valuable when you're useful to them. You begin to shrink, slowly. You stop sharing your opinions. You stop dreaming out loud. You stop laughing as much. But you don't notice it. Not right away. Because everything around you still looks calm. It's only inside that the silence grows. This is how the mind defends the manipulator. It tells you they're not that bad. It reminds you of the good times. It gives you excuses to stay. Because change feels threatening. And the brain prefers discomfort over disruption. This is called cognitive dissonance. When your reality and your emotions no longer match, the brain finds ways to avoid pain. So you make up reasons. You justify. You accept less because walking away feels like failure. That's how they win. They don't overpower you. They convince you that pain is love and that silence is safety. But emotional intelligence can stop that spiral. It teaches you to recognize emotional inconsistency. It gives you a name for the confusion. It reminds you that discomfort is not always growth. Sometimes it's manipulation. The people most vulnerable to manipulation are not broken. They're often the most open, the most giving, the ones who want peace more than power, who choose harmony over conflict, and who confuse pleasing others with love. This is how trauma bonding forms. When the same person who hurts you also soothes you. They make you cry, then wipe your tears. They break your confidence, then tell you how strong you are. They take from you, then thank you for giving. Your mind bonds with them, not despite the pain, but because of it, because the relief feels so powerful after the tension. And slowly, you start craving their approval more than your own clarity. This is the heart of emotional abuse. Not violence, but violation of your boundaries, your voice, your worth. And it happens in slow, invisible waves. You lose yourself, and you call it love. But real love doesn't erase you. It reflects you. It lifts your voice, not lowers it. It adds safety, not confusion. The more you understand your own patterns, the less you fall into theirs. It starts with small steps. Pay attention to how you feel after conversations. Do you feel heard or edited? Do you feel seen or managed? Are you making choices or just avoiding disapproval? This awareness is quiet, but it's powerful. It begins to rebuild your internal compass, the one they tried to silence. You may feel foolish for falling into it. You may blame yourself. But remember, manipulation is not your fault. Being open-hearted is not weakness. And trusting the wrong person doesn't make you broken. It makes you human. In the final part of this chapter, we'll shift the lens. We'll talk about how to gently untangle yourself from these invisible strings and how to rebuild trust in your own mind. You don't need to run, you don't need to scream, you just need to notice. That's where healing starts, not with confrontation, but with quiet recognition. You begin to see the patterns, the way they interrupt when you speak, the way they forget what matters to you, the way they twist your words into weapons, then call you dramatic for reacting. You begin to keep space. You pause before replying. You stop explaining so much. You start listening, not to their voice, but to your own discomfort. And that discomfort, it's a compass. It doesn't scream, it whispers, and it points you back to yourself. Every step you take away from manipulation, your mind gets clearer. You remember what your voice sounds like, what peace feels like, what healthy connection actually looks like. You begin to reclaim your time, your thoughts, your boundaries, and slowly, they lose access to the parts of you they never deserved to hold. The goal isn't revenge, it isn't even justice. It's freedom. Freedom from doubt, freedom from shame, freedom from needing someone else to validate your worth. That's mental strength, not coldness, not walls, but self-trust, quiet and steady. You are not here to be understood by people who benefit from your confusion. You are not meant to shrink for someone else's comfort, and you do not need to prove anything to someone who keeps moving the finish line. If your mind has been twisted by control, you can untwist it, not in a day, but in gentle steps, each one a reminder that your clarity matters, that your feelings are data, and that your boundaries are a form of wisdom, not cruelty. The people who manipulate others may never change, but you can. You can become the kind of person who doesn't fall into the same trap twice, who notices the signs before they become scars, who trusts the quiet voice inside more than the loud lies outside. And that is the beginning of power. In the next chapter, we'll take that awareness even deeper. We'll explore the exact ways manipulators study the mind and how they use small, invisible techniques to build psychological control. Because once you understand their game, you no longer have to play it. Let's look at something else now. Something that's probably been hiding in plain sight all along. The smile that controls. Charm as a weapon. Not every manipulator is cold. Some are warm, charming, funny. They walk into a room and make you feel like you're the only person who matters. They remember your birthday, laugh at your jokes, make you feel special. But that's the trick, because not all charm is honest. Some charm is a mask, not for connection, but for control. It's called calculated likability, a dark psychological tactic where someone makes you like them quickly, so you stop questioning them. This technique doesn't push, it pulls. You feel seen, heard, important, and in that glow your defenses soften. They don't demand trust, they earn it, fast. They ask deep questions, they mirror your interests, they agree with your opinions. It feels like chemistry, but it's actually strategy. The manipulator is gathering data. What excites you, what scares you, what you need, what you've lost. Then they become that answer, not by accident, but by design. It's easy to say, you'd know if someone was faking it. But that's not how this works. Because they don't lie directly. They exaggerate goodness, and you fill in the blanks with trust. Think of Jessica, 31, from Denver. She met a man through mutual friends. He was warm, respectful, thoughtful. He told her everything she ever wanted to hear. Not too much, not too little, just enough. Within weeks, she was sure she'd met someone rare, but the moment she opened up, shared her past, revealed her insecurities, he began to change. He didn't shout. He withdrew, used her vulnerabilities as reasons she needed him, framed her fears as proof she was fragile, and then made himself the only person who could protect her from herself. This is how charm becomes a cage. The door looks open, but your mind is already inside. They rarely say anything cruel. They don't need to. They've already shaped how you see yourself, gently over time, through praise, through subtle correction, through being everything you ever wanted, until you forget what you wanted in the first place. That's how calculated likability works. It's not built on honesty, it's built on design. And the design is simple: become irresistible. So they stop resisting you. The mind doesn't guard itself against someone it likes. It opens, it shares, it bends. That's why charm is one of the most underrated weapons in manipulation. Because it feels good, and because it feels good, it lowers the gate. This tactic is often used by narcissists, cult leaders, toxic managers, and even romantic partners. They know that if you fall for their charisma, you'll hesitate to call out their control. They use eye contact, touch, validation. They smile at the right moment. They laugh with you, not at you. They remember tiny details, and they compliment in ways that feel personal, not scripted. And when you open up, they don't just listen, they archive. Everything you say becomes a tool for later, not to understand you, but to use you. Take Chris, 45, from Arizona. In his job, he was known as a people person. Everyone loved him. He remembered names, bought coffee, gave compliments, but behind that charm, he was using it all to control outcomes. He knew who was insecure, who needed validation, who was afraid of conflict. He would turn people against each other. Subtly. Make suggestions like, "I think Sarah's a little overwhelmed, maybe she's not the right fit." Or, "You're so smart, I think you should lead this, you're better than the others." No one saw it as manipulation, because he was so likable, so kind, so helpful. But that's the genius of it. People defend those they like, even when those people are hurting them. Charm is protection. It creates confusion, because when someone who makes you laugh also makes you feel small, your brain doesn't know which version is real, so it picks the one that feels good. That's the danger. Charm makes the toxic feel safe. It makes manipulation look like magic. It makes you stay. And the longer you stay, the harder it is to imagine they could be doing it on purpose. But the signs are there, not in what they say, but in what they expect. They expect loyalty early. They expect access to your time, your thoughts, your plans. And when you say no, suddenly the charm fades. You start to notice the shift, not in volume, but in energy. They stop smiling as much. They go quiet when you disagree. They don't say you hurt them. They make you feel like you did. That's how the charm trap works. It opens with light, it closes in silence, and you're left confused, wondering what you did wrong, trying harder, giving more, trying to get back to that version of them who made you feel like magic. But that version never really existed. It was a mirror, reflecting who you wanted them to be. And once you're attached to that illusion, you'll tolerate the reality, just to feel that sparkle again. This is not love. It's manipulation through admiration. They build themselves up in your eyes, so you ignore the warning signs. You excuse the pressure. You minimize the discomfort because they're such a good person, because they've done so much for you, because they just want what's best. But the truth is, they want control, and charm is how they get it. Here's how you protect yourself. Don't trust charm too quickly. Notice the speed. If someone wants deep loyalty before real connection, that's a flag. If they praise you too much too soon, that's not love. That's leverage. If disagreement changes their warmth, they were never kind, just strategic. Healthy people don't rush closeness. They allow space. They respect pace. They don't need to charm you into submission. They let trust grow slowly, with consistency, not charisma. And you don't owe anyone your guard down. You don't have to be liked to be safe. You don't have to explain your hesitation. If something feels too perfect too soon, it's probably not real. Because manipulation isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears perfume. Sometimes it tells jokes. Sometimes it smiles. In the next chapter, we'll break down how manipulators turn your guilt into their power, and why saying no becomes harder every time you don't. Now, what we're going to uncover is that thing. You may have never heard its name, but it's already touched you, softly, silently, from within. Guilt tripping. When your kindness becomes their control. They don't scream at you. They make you feel like you screamed. They don't accuse you directly. They just pause long enough for you to doubt yourself. This is how guilt becomes a leash. You say something honest, and they go quiet. You choose yourself, and they look disappointed. You set a boundaries, and suddenly you're the one who's cold. That's the tactic. They don't fight you, they fold, just enough to make you feel like you broke them. It's called guilt tripping, a dark psychological move where someone makes you feel responsible for their emotions so they can influence your decisions. You think you hurt them, you think you were too harsh, too selfish, too much, but the truth is, they're guiding you with your own empathy. And if you don't notice it early, you'll spend years apologizing for things you never did wrong. It starts small. You say, "I can't make it tonight." They reply, "It's okay, I didn't expect much anyway." You mention a need. They sigh, "I guess I'm not enough." You set a simple boundary, and they whisper, "Don't worry, I'll just deal with it alone like I always do." They don't say it to solve anything. They say it so you'll feel something and change your mind. And you do. You call them back. You show up. You give in. Not because you were wrong, but because you were made to feel wrong. You start walking on eggshells, not because they hurt you, but because you're afraid of hurting them. You measure your tone. You soften your words. You offer explanations before they even ask. This is how guilt tripping rewires your behavior. It doesn't ask for obedience. It trains you to volunteer it. The more empathetic you are, the easier it works, because your guilt isn't fake. It's real, but it's misplaced. You feel guilty not for being cruel, but for being honest. That's the manipulator's art. They don't silence you. They make you silence yourself. And the mind? It adjusts quickly. Every time you cave in, your brain makes a note. Being honest leads to pain. Disappointing them makes me bad. And over time, you become someone else. You stop asking for what you need. You start apologizing for taking up space. You begin to feel like a burden, not because you are, but because they've taught you to feel that way. Think of Amanda, 29, from California. She had a best friend who always needed help, emotionally, financially, logistically. Amanda showed up every time, until one week she said no. She was tired, she needed rest, and her friend replied with silence. No anger, just a long pause. Then a message. "I guess I just needed someone real, but maybe that's too much to ask." Amanda cried for hours. She called, apologized, tried to explain. But that's the game. Make you feel like the villain for choosing yourself. Or take Ryan, 37, from Florida. His mother used guilt like a language. If he didn't call, she'd say, "You must be too busy for your own mother." If he didn't visit, she'd say, "I'll just be here alone, like always." He grew up believing love meant never disappointing someone, even if it meant disappointing himself. That belief followed him into every relationship, every friendship, every yes he never wanted to give. That's what guilt tripping steals from you, your right to say no. And once that pattern is learned, you start saying yes when you mean no. You start showing up when you're exhausted. You start shrinking so they can feel full, because if you don't, they'll suffer. And if they suffer, it's your fault. At least that's what they've made you believe. But guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. It's just a feeling, and feelings can be shaped by love or by control. And when guilt is used against you, you begin to serve someone else's comfort instead of protecting your own sanity. That is emotional manipulation, soft, quiet, and devastating. So how do you stop it? You pause, you feel the guilt, and you ask, did I do something wrong? Or did I just do something they didn't like? That one question changes everything. Because real connection doesn't require guilt. It invites honesty. It allows disagreement. It celebrates your no as much as your yes. And any connection that can't survive your honesty was never safe to begin with. You are not here to be someone else's emotional caretaker. You are not a bad person for resting, for disagreeing, for taking up space. You are allowed to protect your peace even if someone else calls that selfish. And the people who truly care for you, they won't make you prove it by suffering. So next time someone uses silence as punishment or sadness as a leash, remember, you don't owe them your peace. You owe yourself your truth. Let's pull the curtain back a little further now, because the next technique doesn't just control your choices. It rewrites your entire memory. Gaslighting, the quiet destruction of your reality. They don't shout, they don't slam doors, they don't even deny what happened. They just make you doubt that it ever did. This is gaslighting, one of the most powerful forms of psychological manipulation. It doesn't control you through fear. It controls you through confusion. You start to forget where the truth ends and their version begins. At first, it feels like simple miscommunication. You say, "That really hurt me." They say, "You're just being too emotional." You say, "You promised we'd talk about this." They say, "You're imagining things." These aren't arguments, they're erasures. Each one chips away at your certainty. Each one teaches your brain a new lesson. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm the problem. That's the trap. Gaslighting doesn't need to be dramatic. It works best when it's subtle. It plays on your deepest desire, to be fair, to give the benefit of the doubt, to keep the peace. But what starts as empathy becomes self-doubt, and what begins as patience turns into silence. The person gaslighting you doesn't need to win the argument. They just need you to stop trusting yourself. And the moment you start second-guessing your own memory, they've won. This happens in relationships, in families, in the workplace, anywhere someone wants control without confrontation. They don't scream, "You're wrong." They whisper, "Are you sure?" And you begin to lose more than just the argument. You begin to lose your grip on reality. Take Laura, 34, from Michigan. She was in a long-term relationship with a man who always changed the story. If she brought up something that bothered her, he'd act shocked. That never happened. Or worse, why would you make up something like that? At first, she pushed back, but over time, she stopped. Not because she stopped noticing the lies, but because she stopped trusting her ability to see the truth. That's how it works. Your memory becomes a battlefield. Your emotions become unreliable. Your version of events becomes fuzzy. And the person gaslighting you, they offer clarity, their own twisted version. And you start to cling to it because your own feels like it's falling apart. That's not love. That's not support. That's mental sabotage. Sometimes the gaslighting gets deeper. It becomes a cycle, one that rewards doubt and punishes certainty. When you agree with their version of reality, everything feels peaceful. But the moment you assert your own memory, they grow cold, distant, disappointed. That's not a coincidence. That's control. In healthy relationships, disagreement is natural. In toxic ones, disagreement becomes a trigger. A test you're always failing. And the manipulator, they wear patience like a costume. I'm just trying to help you see clearly. It hurts me that you don't trust me. I think your emotions are getting the best of you. You begin to wonder if they're right. You question yourself so often that eventually you stop questioning them. And that's when the damage deepens, because gaslighting doesn't just confuse your memory, it rewires your identity. You start adjusting your behavior not to what's real, but to what's safe. You stop speaking up. You stop expressing doubt. You stop being honest with yourself. You create silence just to avoid that crushing feeling of being told you're wrong again. This is the slow death of the self, and it's done with calm voices, soft words, and false concern. In families, this is often generational. A parent says, "You were such a difficult child." Even when your memories tell a different story, you try to speak up. They say, "I don't remember it that way." And now you're doubting your entire childhood. Gaslighting doesn't need proof. It just needs power. It's used by partners, parents, bosses, religious leaders, anyone who fears your independence more than they value your truth. Let's look at Daniel, 41, from Ohio. He had a manager who consistently changed expectations, would praise him in private and criticize him in meetings. When Daniel brought it up, the manager said, "I never said that. I think you misunderstood me." This happened over and over. Daniel began keeping notes. Even then, the manager would respond, "I think you're focusing too much on the negative." Eventually, Daniel stopped reporting the issue, not because it stopped happening, but because he stopped believing his concerns were valid. That's gaslighting at work. It turns evidence into doubt. In romantic relationships, this becomes even more personal. You say, "You lied about where you were." They say, "You're just paranoid." You say, "That message didn't feel respectful." They say, "You're insecure. You always twist things." And if they say it often enough, you begin to believe it. Not because it's true, but because they've repeated it long enough for your brain to replace memory with confusion. That's how the brain works. It values repetition more than accuracy. It favors harmony over truth. So when someone gaslights you long enough, your mind chooses peace over clarity. Even if that peace is poisoned, you shrink yourself just to keep them calm. You silence yourself just to feel stable. You live inside their version of the world, even when it contradicts your soul. And the worst part, you start to gaslight yourself. You say, "Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe they're right." And now, they don't even need to manipulate you anymore. You're doing it for them. That's the darkest truth of gaslighting. It turns victims into their own jailers. But here's the truth. If someone truly cares about you, they'll never make you feel small for remembering something differently. They'll never punish you for having emotions. They'll never use your past to erase your present. And they will never ask you to question yourself just to maintain their comfort. Gaslighting thrives in secrecy. It survives in silence. And it grows in isolation. So how do you break it? You bring it into the light. You keep a record, not to fight, but to remind yourself of the truth. You speak to others. You ask, does this seem normal? You gather evidence, not to win, but to remember what's real. You reclaim your right to your version of reality. That doesn't mean you never make mistakes. It means your memory is not disposable. Your perception is not broken. Your feelings are not invalid. If someone refuses to meet you in truth, you are allowed to walk away. Gaslighting is not a disagreement, it's a psychological war. And your weapon is not anger, it's clarity. You may feel weak right now, you may feel confused, but the fact that you're even asking questions means you're waking up, and that is your first step out of the fog. Let's take another step forward now, because next we'll explore how some people don't just confuse your mind, they try to own your time. And the technique they use? It looks a lot like love, but it's really just control dressed in affection. It begins beautifully. They listen, they praise, they call you their soulmate within days. They send long messages morning and night. They say they've never met anyone like you. You feel seen, you feel chosen, you feel finally safe. But what you don't see right away is that it's not about you. It's about hooking you. This is called love bombing, a psychological manipulation tactic where someone uses overwhelming affection, praise, and attention to gain control. It doesn't feel dark at first, it feels perfect, because it's designed to. The love feels intense, the connection feels instant, and the speed, that's the point. They want to move fast, not because it's real, but because if they move fast, you won't stop to think. You'll call it chemistry. They'll call it fate. But it's not romance, it's strategy. Love bombing isn't love, it's emotional intoxication. They flood your brain with dopamine, endless compliments, surprise gifts, sudden promises, future fantasies. And when you're high on that feeling, they begin shaping your behavior. You stop asking questions, you stop setting boundaries, you stop noticing red flags. Because how could someone who loves you this much be dangerous? Let's pause. Because this isn't just a relationship issue, it's a full-blown psychological game. Love bombing is rooted in control through dependency. The goal is to get you hooked on validation so they can take it away whenever they want. That's what makes it dark, because once you're dependent, they flip the switch. Suddenly they're busy, they don't reply for hours, they seem colder. And you panic, you chase, you try to get it back, not realizing this is the trap. They gave you the high, now they give you withdrawal. And the only way to feel okay again is to earn their attention. You're not being loved, you're being trained. Let's look at Sarah, 28, from Texas. She met a man on a dating app who showered her with attention. He said he'd never felt this way before. He booked trips. He talked about marriage within 3 weeks. At first, she was cautious, but his consistency pulled her in until one day he started canceling plans, stopped texting back, began criticizing her reactions. When she asked what changed, he said, "You're too emotional now. What happened to the fun version of you?" She apologized. She tried harder. That's what love bombing does. It creates a standard of affection that feels impossible to live without. Then it punishes you when you notice the shift. Sarah thought she was in love, but she was really inside a system of emotional control. Or take Michael, 35, from Arizona. He had a boss who praised him endlessly in the first month, told him he was the best hire ever, said he saw a leader in him. Michael felt empowered, motivated, but slowly the praise disappeared. The boss became cold, started saying, "I thought you had more potential than this." Michael worked overtime, pushed harder, chased the approval that once felt so natural. He didn't realize he was never being mentored, he was being conditioned. That's what love bombing looks like outside of romance. It's not always flowers and flattery, sometimes it's opportunity, attention, status, and once you're addicted to it, they control when you get more. So why does this tactic work so well? Because it plays on human need. We all want to be seen, valued, loved, but when someone floods those needs too fast, too strong, too soon, you should pause. Because real love builds slowly. It respects time. It grows with mutual discovery, not grand performance. When someone love bombs you, they don't want to discover you. They want to own your emotional response. And the moment you react to their intensity, you're on the hook. This is what makes love bombing dangerous. It creates a false sense of depth. You feel like this person knows you, understands you, is meant for you, but really, they're just mirroring what you want to hear. They study your vulnerabilities. They echo your dreams. They perform your perfect match, not to connect, but to capture. You become dependent on how they make you feel, and they become the supplier. But here's the dark shift. Once they're sure you're attached, the affection becomes conditional. You're rewarded when you please them, punished when you resist, and your mind starts tying your self-worth to their approval. This is emotional addiction, and they're the dealer. Let's be clear, not all intense beginnings are manipulative. Sometimes love does happen fast, but healthy love still respects your space. It listens to your no. It doesn't guilt you for slowing down. Love bombing doesn't tolerate resistance. If you pause, they push harder. If you ask for space, they grow cold. If you question the pace, they call you scared. Because to them, love isn't connection. It's control through emotion. And once you see it for what it is, you begin to take your power back. So how do you protect yourself? You pay attention to pace. You notice when affection feels more like performance. You ask yourself, do I feel grounded in this or just overwhelmed? You check for space. Real love allows air. Love bombing suffocates. You set boundaries early and watch how they respond. Do they respect it or do they guilt trip you? Do they listen or do they turn it around on you? Because how someone handles your limits is the realest thing about them. And if someone loves you only when you feel good, but disappears the moment you feel confused, that's not love. That's manipulation in disguise. Here's what healthy affection feels like. It's steady, not overwhelming. It grows over time, not overnight. It invites you to be fully yourself, not the version that flatters them. You don't have to perform. You don't have to prove. You don't have to chase. And most of all, you don't feel like you're losing yourself just to keep it. So if someone ever makes you feel like you're on a pedestal, too soon, too fast, too intensely, step back and ask, are they seeing me? Or just projecting what they want me to be? Because that answer might save you from months or even years of emotional control. Love bombing isn't about affection, it's about possession, and you were never meant to be possessed. Let's move to something deeper now. Because what if I told you the next tactic doesn't flood you with affection? It makes you feel responsible for someone else's misery, even when you're not. We need to talk about the next technique. It's quieter, more subtle, but it can trap you for years if you miss the signs. Triangulation, turning you against others to stay in control. Sometimes the person manipulating you isn't just controlling you. They're also controlling your perception of others. They drop a comment, a glance, a subtle comparison, something that makes you question someone you once trusted. You may think it's harmless, but it's not. This is triangulation, a dark psychological tactic where manipulators involve a third person or outside party to confuse, divide, or control. They do this not by attacking directly, but by creating emotional chaos around you. At first, it seems like nothing. They might say, I don't want to make you paranoid, but I've heard some things about Sarah. Or, everyone thinks you're a little too sensitive lately. I didn't want to say anything, but it's subtle, slippery, and devastating because it doesn't just shake your view of the world, it isolates you. You begin to wonder who you can trust. You feel judged, paranoid. You seek reassurance from the very person who planted the doubt. That's the trick. They poison the connection between you and others, then become the only one you feel safe with. It's not just manipulation, it's emotional containment. Let's stop here, because triangulation isn't random, it's calculated. It's used by people who fear losing power, by those who don't want you thinking independently, by those who prefer chaos, because in chaos, they remain the center. They play both sides. They share concerns that others have about you, or they act like you're the one being talked about behind your back. But they never offer proof. They don't name names. They don't clarify facts, because clarity would kill the manipulation. Let's talk about Amanda, 33, from New Jersey. She worked in a high-pressure marketing firm. Her boss constantly praised her, but casually mentioned that the other team leads thought she was too aggressive. No names, no context, just a whisper of rejection. At first, she brushed it off, but the seed was planted. She began doubting her coworkers. avoided lunch breaks, became overly self-conscious in meetings. Weeks later, that same boss told the team, "Amanda's been really distant lately. I don't know what happened to her team spirit." He created the distance, then weaponized it. This is the cycle of triangulation. Create division, feed it, then use it as proof that you were right all along. Or take Robert, 40, from Illinois. His wife would often say things like, "I was talking to my sister. She thinks you don't really love me." Or, "Even your best friend notices how you've changed." Each time Robert was thrown off, he had no idea these conversations were happening, but to prove her wrong, he'd overcorrect. He'd become more affectionate, more available, not from love, but from the fear of being misunderstood. That's what triangulation does. It forces you into emotional performance, not because it's real, but because someone's using your fear of rejection against you. Now let's understand the psychology. Triangulation thrives in relationships where trust is fragile. It works best on empathetic people, the kind who overthink, who reflect deeply, who value others' perceptions. The manipulator knows this, so they use third-party voices to amplify your inner self-doubt. They never need to say, "You're wrong." They just tell you others think you are. And suddenly, you're no longer defending your truth. You're defending your image. That's when the control sets in, because now you look to them for clarity. You ask, "What did they say? What do you think about me? What should I do differently?" And just like that, you give away your authority. You stop trusting your own mind. That's not love. That's psychological warfare. Let's go deeper. Triangulation is powerful because it creates false alliances. They make you think they're protecting you when they're actually isolating you. They make you believe everyone else is against you, so you cling tighter to them. And when you try to confront the others, you sound paranoid, overreactive, like the very image they've already painted of you. It's a trap, and it's meant to break your connection to others, so they become your only emotional supplier. Over time, your world shrinks. You stop sharing openly. You censor yourself. You become anxious around people who once felt safe, all while trusting the person who started the spiral. But here's the dark genius. They always stay neutral. They don't insult directly. They just want you to know what's being said. That false neutrality makes it harder to call out because it seems like they're helping, but they're not. They're isolating you by making you doubt everyone else and doubt yourself in the process. This is how emotional empires are built, not through violence, but through quiet manipulation of perception. Here's how you spot it. 1. You start doubting people you used to trust, but only after one person planted the idea. 2. That person never gives full clarity, just vague concerns. 3. You feel confused, paranoid, or overly dependent after conversations with them. 4. You find yourself defending yourself more often, not against attacks, but against assumptions. 5. Your world feels smaller, more controlled, more filtered. So how do you break free? The first step is brutal honesty with yourself. Ask, did I believe this person because I trust them? Or did I believe them because I was afraid not to? Then create space. Distance reveals motives. Step back and reconnect with others directly. Ask questions, clarify, listen for yourself. You'll often discover that the opinions they told you about never existed, because triangulation only works if you never check. So check. Stop letting someone else narrate your relationships. Reclaim your right to direct connection. Your emotional safety doesn't have to pass through one person. You deserve clarity, and triangulation hates clarity. Here's a rule. If someone constantly tells you what others think, but never encourages you to speak with them directly, they're not protecting you. They're dividing you. Healthy people don't isolate. They connect. They say, "Why don't you talk to them yourself?" Not, "Let me tell you what they said about you." Control hides in those little phrases, those vague warnings, those emotional heads-ups. If it always comes from one source, you're being manipulated. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Triangulation is built on silence, the silence between you and others, the silence that comes from fear, the silence that gives the manipulator room to speak for everyone else. Break that silence, start asking, start reconnecting. You'll realize you were never the problem. They just made you feel that way, so you wouldn't look too closely. Let's take this further now, because there's another tactic. One even more quiet. It doesn't divide you from others, it divides you from yourself, by slowly making you believe that your needs are wrong, and your silence is strength. Silent treatment. using absence as psychological punishment. Sometimes, the loudest kind of control is completely silent. No shouting, no insults, just a heavy pause that never ends. They look at you, then they look away, and the silence stays. You try to speak, but there's no answer, no words, no nods, no eye contact, just emotional absence that cuts deeper than any scream. This is the silent treatment, one of the most subtle, cruel, and confusing forms of psychological punishment. A form of manipulation that speaks loudest through what's not said. It begins quietly, a disagreement, a moment of tension, something small, sometimes you don't even know what, and then, without warning, they disappear emotionally. They're still in the room, still in your life, but mentally and emotionally they vanish. They withdraw affection, they ignore your attempts to reconnect, they refuse to explain, and every second of silence begins to feel like a test you must pass. You wonder, what did I do? Should I apologize? Are they okay? Or am I the problem? This is the trap. The silent treatment shifts the emotional burden onto you, even when they're the one choosing to disconnect. At its core, the silent treatment is emotional control through abandonment. It's the message, if you don't behave how I want, I will erase my presence from you. That doesn't feel like conflict, it feels like punishment. Let's pause here, because silence in healthy relationships can be healing. Time to cool down, moments to reflect, but in dark psychology, silence becomes a weapon. It isn't space, it's suspension. A way to leave you hanging until you break yourself down and beg for closeness. Now you're no longer trying to understand. You're trying to earn your way back. That's when the manipulation is complete. Take Rachel, 34, from Ohio. Her husband would often go silent for days after small disagreements. No explanation, no eye contact, no warmth. He wouldn't yell, he wouldn't argue. He would just disappear, emotionally, while sleeping in the same bed. Rachel would cry, plead, apologize for things she didn't even understand, just to bring his presence back. It wasn't communication, it was control. Each silent episode trained her to avoid conflict, trained her to stay small, trained her to fear disconnection more than dishonesty. Or take Marcus, 28, from Arizona. He worked with a team leader who used silence as a form of punishment. If Marcus asked too many questions, silence. If he made a suggestion that challenged authority, silence. No feedback, no eye contact, no meetings. Other employees would get instructions. Marcus would be left out, in silence. He began second-guessing his value, working harder, staying late, all to earn back a voice that was deliberately being withheld. This is how emotional systems break down, not through conflict, but through silence that starves the relationship until one person gives in. Here's why it works. Humans are wired to seek connection. Silence triggers uncertainty, and uncertainty demands resolution. So when someone withdraws communication, you don't feel independent, you feel guilty, you feel like you must be broken, or else they wouldn't disappear. This is not love, it's not space, it's emotional gaslighting without words. You begin to ask yourself, am I too much? Do I deserve this? Did I ruin everything? But the truth is this, they are choosing silence because they know it hurts you more than words ever could. Let's go deeper. The silent treatment isn't about peace, it's about power. It says, I will withhold my presence until you surrender yours. It rewrites the rules of connection, making attention something you must earn instead of something freely given. And it creates a dynamic where one person becomes a child, constantly seeking the approval of the silent parent. This is control disguised as calm. This is control disguised as calm, because in the silent treatment there's no visible abuse, no insults, no yelling, no physical threats, just emptiness that becomes unbearable over time. This form of manipulation is harder to prove, harder to defend against, harder to describe, because how do you tell someone they're hurting me with their absence? It sounds small, it sounds fragile, but inside, it feels like dying slowly in a locked room. You begin to doubt your right to be heard. You start thinking maybe silence is better than arguments. And eventually, you stop speaking first. Now, they don't have to silence you. You do it yourself. That's when they've won. Let's break it down further. There are stages to the silent treatment cycle. 1. trigger a disagreement, a perceived disrespect, or even your emotional independence. 2. Withdrawal. They stop speaking, engaging, or responding, often suddenly and without explanation. 3. Punishment phase. You're left confused, anxious, and emotionally abandoned. 4. Reconnection. They return as if nothing happened, often when you've broken down and apologized. 5. Control established. Now you know. If you step out of line, they will vanish again. That pattern conditions your nervous system. You begin to associate truth with punishment, freedom with danger, and compliance with peace. This is psychological slavery, and it often looks like quiet people keeping peace. But peace isn't silence, it's understanding, and understanding cannot grow where silence is used as a cage. Here's how you recognize this trap in your life. You feel deep anxiety when someone close to you becomes quiet. You apologize just to end the silence, not because you did something wrong. You find yourself tiptoeing in conversations to avoid being cut off again. You feel emotionally starved, but don't know how to ask for connection. You begin to believe you're the one who's too needy, when in fact, they're just unavailable. Now ask yourself, who benefits from your confusion? Who grows stronger when you feel uncertain? Who wins when you blame yourself for their silence? Because it's not an accident, it's a structure, and it's designed to reshape your behavior without them saying a word. Here's the reality they never want you to see. Silence is not always peace, and quiet is not always kindness. Sometimes silence is an invisible leash, tight enough to control, loose enough to deny. And when someone holds that leash, they don't have to chase you. You walk back on your own. Let's talk now about healing from the silent treatment, because awareness is only the first step. To reclaim your voice, you must stop rewarding silence. When someone cuts you off emotionally, you don't chase. You confront with clarity, not begging but boundary. Say it simply, I am open to communication when you are, but I won't stay in emotional limbo. And most importantly, resist the urge to earn back their voice, because once you start working for someone's presence, you've already surrendered your own. Rebuild your inner anchor. Remind yourself, their silence is not proof of your guilt. It's a strategy, a tool, a way to gain control by making you feel powerless. Take back that power by staying centered. Don't over-explain. Don't beg. Don't perform. Instead, hold space for your truth, even if they refuse to hear it, because silence loses its power when you no longer need their noise to feel valid. And here's something they never expect. You can survive without their voice. You can create peace without their permission. You can exist fully, even when someone withdraws. That is your real strength. That is emotional intelligence. That is mental resilience. Because in the end, the silent treatment isn't about communication. It's about conditioning. And the moment you stop reacting, the conditioning begins to crack. Let it crack, let it break, because what comes next is your voice returning to you. Stronger, clearer, unshakable. Let's open another door now, because while some use silence to punish, others use false promises to keep you hooked. And the truth is, those promises were never about love. They were just another kind of trap, something far more seductive and far more hollow. Future faking, selling dreams to control your present. Sometimes the most dangerous manipulator doesn't lie to you about the past. They lie to you about the future, not with threats, not with silence, but with dreams, with promises that make you see a life that feels so real. You begin living for it instead of living in the truth. This is future faking, a dark psychological tactic where someone uses false promises of love, success, or change to gain control in the present. They sell you a vision, one so beautiful, so tailored to your deepest needs that you stop questioning the now, because you're too busy hoping for later. You stop noticing the manipulation, because your eyes are on the version of them they said they'd become. But that version never comes, because it was never meant to. Let's pause here, because future faking isn't about hope, it's about leverage. They create a version of the future where everything you want exists, but only if you stay loyal now, only if you comply, only if you don't ask too many questions. The trick is simple. They give you everything, in theory. But in practice, you're always waiting, always giving, always sacrificing for a version of them that only exists in your imagination. That's the genius of future faking. They don't make you feel weak. They make you feel inspired, so you never see the trap. until it's too late. Let's talk about Lauren, 31, from Texas. She was with a man who, from the first few weeks, spoke of forever, marriage, children, a house in the countryside. He described their life in detail, down to the dog's name. She felt seen, wanted, cherished. But weeks turned into months, and every time she brought up moving forward, he said, "Just a little more time. I need to get things in place." But nothing ever moved. He never introduced her to his family. He avoided financial discussions. He canceled important plans last minute, but the promises never stopped. She waited and waited, and one day realized she wasn't in a relationship. She was in a projection of a relationship, a dream that he gave her, so he could take her time, her trust, her energy, without ever committing. That's what future faking steals. Not just your heart, but your time. Because when you're busy chasing one day, you stop questioning today. You compromise, you justify, you forgive what should never be forgiven, because you believe that soon it will all make sense. Now let's take James, 38, from Seattle. He started a business partnership with a charismatic CEO who sold him a grand vision, multi-million-dollar contracts, global expansion, stock options. James left his stable job, poured his savings into the company, worked 16-hour days for a year. But when it came time to formalize ownership, there were delays, then silence, then a vague excuse. "We're almost there, just trust me." He trusted. And one day, the CEO ghosted, took the contacts, rebranded, left James with nothing but exhaustion and confusion. This wasn't bad luck, it was future faking in business. Because manipulators don't always wear the mask of lovers. Sometimes they're bosses, leaders, friends, family. Anyone who knows your dreams can use them as a weapon. Future faking works because it speaks directly to your unmet emotional needs. If you crave security, they promise stability. If you crave love, they promise forever. If you crave meaning, they promise destiny. They mirror your desires, reflect your vision, and then build a castle made of air, beautiful, detailed, and completely unreachable. And while you stare at that castle, they keep taking your presence, your patience, your silence. You become too emotionally invested in the dream to walk away from the nightmare. Let's break it down psychologically. Future faking is intermittent reinforcement wrapped in fantasy. You're given just enough affection, just enough hope, just enough glimpses to believe that the real reward is coming, and your brain holds on because it wants to believe. It wants the relationship to work. It wants the promises to be real. It wants to believe that all this effort will eventually be worth it. That's how trauma bonds form, not through violence, but through inconsistent hope. And the longer you wait, the more invested you become, not in the reality, but in the imagined version of them. That version becomes sacred, and you defend it, even to yourself, even when the red flags are blinding, because you're not attached to who they are. You're attached to who they said they'd become, and letting go feels like killing a dream. But that's the key. It was a dream, not a plan, not a partnership, not love, just a carefully placed illusion to keep you still. Manipulators know one truth. People won't move if they believe they're almost there, so they keep you almost there, almost ready, almost loved, almost chosen, and almost becomes your prison. How do you spot future faking? Here are the signs. 1. Promises are grand, urgent, and detailed, but lack timelines or action steps. 2. They change the subject or deflect when you ask for accountability. 3. You feel deeply connected, but strangely stuck. 4. You've sacrificed a lot, but progress always feels 1 month away. 5. You're emotionally exhausted from waiting, but too afraid to walk away. If this is you, you're not naive, you're human, and they knew that. They knew how to use your vision against you. They didn't need to trap your body, they trapped your hopes. Here's what they didn't expect. That one day you'd stop waiting. That one day you'd realize that a real future doesn't require you to suffer in the present. Because real love doesn't hold itself hostage. Real partnership doesn't delay forever. Real connection doesn't leave you begging for the next chapter. It shows up, now, consistently. If someone says, "You're my forever," but can't show up for you today, they're not building a future. They're building control. Let's be clear, future faking is not about hope. It's about delay tactics. It's a way to disarm you, to calm your questions, to keep you hooked without ever having to give you what they promised. It's emotional fraud, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. So how do you heal? First, separate the vision from the person. Ask, was it them who gave me joy or the future they described? Because the truth is, you may have fallen in love with their words, not their reality. Second, write down every promise that was made, and next to it, write, what actions have they taken to make this real? If the answer is none, then stop treating dreams like facts. Third, take your power back, not by confronting them, but by confronting yourself. Ask, do I want to live in hope or in truth? Because truth hurts once, but hope that never arrives hurts every day. You don't need more time. You need more clarity. And here it is. If someone keeps pushing the future forward, they are pulling you back. You are not unworthy. You are just being fed delay as a way to keep you loyal. But you can leave. You can walk away from the unfinished story and write your own. The most powerful thing you can do is stop waiting. Build the life they promised you, but build it without them. Because if it was real, you wouldn't have to chase it. You'd already be living it. Let's move deeper now. Because while some trap you with promises, others twist your own emotions, using your kindness, your loyalty, and your empathy to make you feel guilty for asking for the bare minimum. And what happens next will show you just how deeply the mind can be manipulated through guilt alone. Negging, subtle insults that shatter self-worth. They don't always insult you directly. Sometimes they smile when they do it. Sometimes they call it a joke. Sometimes they say you're too sensitive when it stings, but you feel it. The sting that lingers longer than it should. The confusion that wraps around your self-worth like a fog. The silent voice inside that starts to ask, am I not enough? That's negging, a quiet, calculated technique where someone undermines your confidence just enough to make you doubt yourself and crave their validation. It sounds like this. You're pretty for someone with your kind of face. You're smart, but you don't really get deep stuff, do you? You'd be more attractive if you tried harder. And then it's followed by a laugh, or a shrug, or the chilling phrase, relax, I was just kidding. But your body doesn't laugh. Your mind doesn't feel light, because you know, deep down, something just shifted inside you. Let's pause here. Because negging isn't an accident. It's a system, a manipulation tactic wrapped in humor, disguised as flirtation, delivered with a smile. But what it really does is make you reach for someone who's already pushing you down. It's a trap. And the cruel part, you'll want their approval more, the more they take your worth apart. Let's talk about Marissa. She's 26, lives in Chicago. She met a man who was charming, witty, confident. He complimented her the first time they met, then followed it with, "You're cute." "I usually go for taller girls, though." She laughed, but something inside her shifted, not visibly, not instantly, but she started wearing heels more, standing straighter, trying harder. He never asked her to. He didn't have to. The seed had already been planted. That's how negging works. It enters your mind quietly, not like a storm, but like a virus. And slowly you begin adjusting who you are, just to feel enough for someone who never truly saw your worth. Here's what makes it darker. Negging doesn't start with hate. It starts with interest, attraction, charm. It's used to destabilize confidence, not by rejecting someone, but by pulling them closer with one hand while cutting them down with the other. So why do people fall for it? Because your brain responds to uncertainty. When someone gives you a compliment, then pulls it back, you don't resist them. You start trying to earn them. This is how addiction to validation forms. Negging is powerful because it creates a void, then makes them the only one who can fill it. You start depending on them to feel attractive, to feel smart, to feel seen, but they only give enough to keep you doubting yourself and grateful for their crumbs. This isn't teasing. This isn't humor. This is psychological grooming. Let's look at Kyle. He's 35, works in tech in California. He joined a new team and quickly built a connection with one of the senior partners. At first, the partner praised Kyle's work, then casually said, "You're great at presentations. Just wish you had more charisma like the others." Kyle felt confused. He'd never had issues with confidence, but now he wondered, was he boring? Was he replaceable? He started doubting his voice in meetings, overcompensating, staying late, trying to be more like the others. And every now and then, that same partner would drop another subtle jab, just enough to keep Kyle unsure, but never enough to be called out. This wasn't mentorship, it was control, because when someone weakens your identity, you become more compliant, more dependent, less likely to walk away. That's the goal of negging, to keep you insecure enough to stay, but grateful enough to obey. Now let's strip it down. Negging follows a clear emotional formula. 1. Target a visible or personal trait. 2. Deliver a disguised insult, often through humor. 3. Trigger self-doubt without confrontation. 4. Offer occasional validation to create dependency. Over time, this breaks confidence from within. You don't become weak overnight. You become someone who keeps adjusting, apologizing, trying harder to be loved by someone who only loves their ability to shrink you. The dangerous part, you may not even realize it's happening, because society normalizes it, movies romanticize it, and manipulators defend it. They say, "I'm just keeping it real. I thought you liked banter. I don't date people who can't take jokes." But this isn't honesty, it's erasure. It's an attack on identity, dressed up as chemistry. Here's the truth. Anyone who loves you doesn't make you feel small to feel powerful. They don't mock your dreams, your looks, your background, your voice. They don't turn your light into a punchline and then expect you to shine for them. Anyway, that's not connection. That's conquest. Let's go deeper. Negging works best on people with high empathy and hidden self-doubt. Because if you already carry quiet insecurities, someone highlighting them, then withdrawing validation feels like truth. You'll think, maybe they're just being honest. Maybe I really am too much. Not enough. Hard to love. But here's the twist. Negging isn't about you. It's about control. When someone needs to cut you down to keep you close, it means they fear who you might become if you fully believed in yourself. So they keep you small, subtly, strategically, repeatedly. And the more you lose your center, the more they gain control. But it doesn't stop there. Negging can evolve into full-blown identity erosion, where you begin filtering every decision, every outfit, word, opinion, through their unspoken judgment. You stop dressing how you want, stop laughing too loud, stop pursuing things that once made you feel alive. Because what if they use it against you? What if they mock it? What if they walk away? That's when you know you're not in a relationship. You're in a psychological cage, and you're handing them the key. Now pause, take a breath. Look inward. Have you ever felt yourself shrink in the presence of someone you loved? Felt unsure, not because of conflict, but because of the way they casually picked you apart? That was never love. That was programming. A silent process designed to replace your self-belief with dependency on their perception. But you can reverse it. Here's how. 1. Spot the pattern. Ask, is this person often using jokes that target my insecurities? 2. Separate your worth from their words. What they say is often a reflection of their need to control, not your value. 3. Speak the impact, not just the intention. It may be a joke to you, but it doesn't feel good to me. 4. Withdraw the reward. Stop laughing it off. Stop rewarding the insult with attention, defense, or over-explanation. 5. Set clear emotional boundaries, and if they repeatedly cross them, leave. Because healing doesn't begin when they apologize. It begins when you believe yourself again. Negging is designed to keep you confused, unsure, quiet, but your silence isn't safety. It's surrender, and you don't have to surrender anymore. Your voice, your choices, your confidence, they all belong to you. You don't need to shrink to be loved. You don't need to be mocked to be worthy. You don't need to stay just because they occasionally throw you a compliment between the insults, because every time they joke at your expense, you pay in self-esteem, and you deserve better. Let's move further now. Because while some manipulate with fake charm, others wear the mask of the victim so convincingly that you begin to feel like the abuser just for protecting yourself. And what you'll learn next will change how you see guilt, roles, and emotional reversal. Forever. Hoovering. When they pull you back just to wipe you again. You thought it was over. You believed silence meant safety. You mistook their absence for escape. But then they came back. Not with remorse, not with repair, but with softness. They return with warmth, with the mask of familiarity. They say things that reach the part of you still healing. It sounds like closure, like longing, like maybe they've changed. But this isn't reconciliation, it's hoovering. And hoovering isn't love. It's the final phase of control, the psychological vacuum that pulls you back into destruction just when you're finding your balance again. It's not about missing you. It's about reactivating you. These manipulators don't come back because they see your value. They return because they've lost access to it. They are architects of vulnerability. Every word is shaped not to connect, but to penetrate. Every smile is a code for control. Hoovering is not affection. It is data extraction disguised as emotion. They remember what made you stay, what made you cry, what broke you open, and they offer it back just enough to reopen the wound. Your memory becomes their canvas, and your need for closure becomes their entry point. In Boston, Nicole had survived a 2-year relationship with a narcissist who thrived on gaslighting. After finally leaving, she found strength in solitude. But 3 months into her recovery, she received a check-in message. "Just wanted to see how you're doing. I've been doing a lot of thinking." It was gentle. It felt human. Her heart softened. She responded. Within 2 weeks, he was back in her life. Love bombing, promising therapy, making her laugh again. By week 6, he was back to dismissing her feelings and triangulating her with his female friends. The cycle resumed, only now it hurt worse, because this time she knew better. This is how hoovering works. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't demand, it seduces. It doesn't confront, it creeps. This tactic thrives on 4 emotional fractures: loneliness, confusion, nostalgia, and guilt. When they sense your guard has lowered, when your routines get quieter, when your strength begins to feel heavy, that's when they reach in. They'll send a meme, an old photo, a song lyric, or a "remember when" voice note. They'll use your softness against you. They'll bait you with the ghost of your best moments. But they are not coming back to build. They are coming back to break. More subtly, more deeply, more effectively than before. Hoovering is strategic. It's surveillance-based emotional warfare. They notice when your social media posts slow down. They remember your birthday. They know what time you used to fall asleep. They know what quote will move you. They don't need direct access anymore. They know how to move through your digital shadows. Your vulnerability is visible to them in pixels and silence. And when they reappear, it's never about righting wrongs. It's about re-establishing control. Your healing threatens them, not because they love you, but because your detachment starves them. When you no longer serve their ego, you become an absence they need to fill. Not for love, but for dominance. In Dallas, Marcus was 8 months free from his ex-husband, a covert narcissist who used affection to destabilize boundaries. Then one day, he got a handwritten note in the mail. "I still remember the way you made Sunday coffee. There's a silence in my mornings now." It was nostalgic, warm, disarming. Marcus paused. It felt genuine. He called him. 3 days later, they met. 2 weeks later, Marcus was again apologizing for things he hadn't done, questioning his own perception, and begging for emotional clarity. What felt like closure was a trap, a reset of the abuse cycle. Hoovering disguises itself as peace, but it is warfare beneath velvet. The manipulator's true fear isn't losing you, it's losing their grip on you. They don't crave partnership, they crave obedience. Their emotional currency is not connection, it is control. They reappear when your light begins to return, when your boundaries start working, when you've tasted peace, because that peace proves you never needed them. And nothing enrages the manipulator more than becoming irrelevant. You must remember, attention is not apology, contact is not healing, familiarity is not safety, their presence is not proof of change. It's proof that your detachment hurt their power. You do not owe them a response. You do not owe them explanation. Silence is your protection, not your punishment. And if guilt begins to creep in, remember who abandoned you when you needed understanding. Remember who turned cold when you were crying. Remember who only became kind when you walked away. What you miss is not real. It's the illusion of what could have been. And illusions are the favorite weapons of manipulators. They study your patterns, they wait for weak moments, and they bait your compassion. They say things like, "I just wanted to hear your voice. You meant more to me than you'll ever know. Maybe we both made mistakes." These aren't olive branches, they're hooks. The goal is to dissolve your clarity, to cloud the facts, to reframe the past. Because if they can re-enter your memory, they can re-enter your mind. But you must stay rooted in reality. Real love doesn't come back only when it's convenient. Real change doesn't beg for access. It earns it. Hoovering is the performance of remorse, but remorse without transformation is just manipulation. Let your nervous system speak, the tightness in your throat, the dull ache in your stomach, the urge to please, the fear of hurting their feelings. That's your body remembering what your mind tries to forget. That's your intelligence speaking, not your trauma. And if part of you still wants to believe them, that's okay. It means you still have a heart, but a heart without boundaries becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. When they reappear, write down the reasons you left. Record the facts, reread the truth, because their presence will always try to rewrite it. And always ask, if they were capable of growth, why did it only begin when I withdrew? If they loved me, why did they vanish when I was vulnerable? If they cared, why do they now need access, not distance, to show it? Protect your healing like sacred ground. Because to a manipulator, your healing is proof they've lost control. If they respected your boundaries, they wouldn't return uninvited. If they had changed, they would honor your absence. If they had grown, they would not re-enter as temptation. They would arrive as truth. Your recovery isn't linear, but each boundary you enforce is a brick in the fortress of your future. Your silence is not weakness, it is strategy. Your distance is not cruelty, it is clarity. Let them miss the version of you that no longer exists. Let them grieve the power they lost. Let them speak into the void you've outgrown. Because when you don't respond, you break the cycle. And when you break the cycle, you become untouchable. This isn't about revenge. This is about rebirth. And rebirth requires one final act, not responding to the hand that once broke you. So if they text you, "I miss us," let them. If they say, "I've changed," let them prove it to themselves. You don't need to witness it. Your chapter is written elsewhere now. And if you ever forget why you left, reread the pain, reread the confusion, reread the emptiness you felt in their presence. That was never love. That was control painted to look like care. Hoovering is a trapdoor. Don't open it twice. Now, what you're about to learn is darker than what came before. Emotional withholding. Starving you of love to create dependence. Emotional control doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it drifts in like a fog. Quiet, passive, invisible. There is no screaming, no accusation, no theatrical walkout. Just stillness. Stillness that starves. Emotional withholding is not about silence. It's about precision. The silence is intentional. The stillness is designed. The absence isn't emptiness, it's a message. And the message is, you no longer matter. This tactic doesn't erupt, it recedes, it doesn't lash out, it fades away. What makes it dangerous is not how loud it is, but how slowly it replaces your expectations. You stop asking, you stop hoping, you start doubting yourself. There's no confrontation, that would require courage. There's no closure, that would require honesty. Instead, the manipulator simply disappears into the distance between your question and their refusal to answer it. That silence becomes your punishment, and your hunger for connection becomes their control. It is never about their absence. It is about your reaction to it. In the early stages, they were responsive, affectionate, connected. Now, without warning or explanation, that connection is rationed. They withdraw emotionally but remain physically near. They show up at dinner but remain unreachable. They sleep beside you but are no longer with you. And you begin to adapt. You learn to shrink your needs. You teach yourself to feel guilty for wanting support. You internalize the idea that you're too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too expectant. But what you're actually doing is starving. In Portland, a woman named Amanda, 38, once described her 8-year relationship with a man who never yelled, never cheated, never hit, but always disappeared emotionally whenever she needed anything more than surface-level attention. When her father died, he grew quieter. When she lost her job, he became cold. She began blaming herself. "Maybe I overwhelm people," she wrote in her journal. But the truth was, she had been trained to see neglect as her own flaw. This is how emotional withholding works. It doesn't attack your sense of self directly, it teaches you to turn against it. Over time, Amanda stopped expressing sadness. She stopped asking for reassurance. She celebrated birthdays alone. She pretended everything was fine. And every time she received a rare compliment or touch, it felt like sunlight after a long winter. She became grateful for scraps. Gratitude becomes a leash when you're being emotionally starved. This tactic is not passive. It's engineered. They know the power of what they're not giving you. They know how to ration their affection like oxygen. And when you begin to suffocate, they reward your compliance with temporary closeness. That closeness becomes addictive, not because it's real, but because it's rare. The unpredictable cycle of withholding and releasing affection mirrors the same intermittent reinforcement used in psychological conditioning. Just like in a slot machine, the payoff doesn't need to be consistent to keep you invested. It needs to be unpredictable. That unpredictability wires your nervous system to stay hyper-focused. You begin scanning every gesture, every pause, every change in tone. You become emotionally vigilant, not to protect yourself, but to avoid triggering their retreat. They don't even have to leave you. They just have to remove the warmth you depend on, and suddenly your craving for connection becomes your captivity. In Detroit, a 24-year-old graduate student named Tyler experienced this while dating a partner who, on the surface, seemed emotionally intelligent. But every time Tyler expressed fear, sadness, or self-doubt, his partner would say nothing. No support, no touch, no empathy. Days would pass, then suddenly she'd send a sweet text, make a playful joke, offer a brief hug, just enough to reset the emotional table. Tyler began avoiding all emotional conversations just to preserve the peace. He called it growth, but it was submission. That's what this tactic does. It reframes your silence as maturity. They don't want you to express, they want you to adapt. And so you do. You stop being vulnerable. You shrink your voice. You suppress the very things that make connection real. Because in their presence, vulnerability is punished with withdrawal. They teach you slowly that love is conditional. And the condition is your silence. You're not loved for who you are. You're tolerated when you're compliant, and when you're no longer easy to manage, they vanish into stillness again. This doesn't just create emotional loneliness, it creates self-doubt at a cellular level. You begin to mistrust your own needs. You begin to resent your own desire to be seen, to be held, to be heard. You convince yourself that needing love is a weakness, and so you become strong. But it's not strength, it's suppression. You are no longer being loved, you are being shaped. The brilliance of emotional withholding lies in its invisibility. There are no sharp edges, no bruises, no shouting matches, just a vanishing act that leaves you confused rather than outraged. And because there is nothing overt to point to, it's easy to blame yourself. Maybe you've become too emotional, too reactive, too fragile. But what's really happening is trauma without a villain, starvation without a plate, loneliness within proximity. They are not overwhelmed, they are withholding. And withholding is power. It gives them control over the rhythm of your emotional life. You are no longer asking, do they love me? You are now asking, when will they return? This shift is psychological. You begin measuring your worth by the intervals of their silence. The longer they withhold, the more desperate you become. And desperation breeds compliance. They don't need to ask you to behave. You do it yourself, instinctively, in hopes of avoiding the next withdrawal. This is why emotional withholding often doesn't register as abuse, because the pain it causes is internalized, personalized, and privatized. It becomes a story you tell yourself, I was too much, I pushed them away. But the truth is, they were never pulled away. They were controlling your access to closeness, and every time you made yourself smaller, quieter, and more agreeable just to keep them near, you reinforced their belief that withholding works. And it does, because love, when transformed into a scarcity, becomes a tool of power. This tactic doesn't only appear in romantic relationships, it surfaces in family dynamics, friendships, even workplaces. The boss who stops acknowledging you after you voice a concern, the friend who disappears when you draw a boundary, the parent who punishes emotion with coldness. The message is always the same. Your emotional truth is too costly, and so you retreat inward. You become your own censor. You pre-edit your expression to avoid isolation, but in doing so, you isolate yourself anyway. Emotional withholding not only changes how you relate to others, it changes how you relate to yourself. You no longer see your needs as sacred. You see them as inconvenient. You judge your desire for closeness as weakness. You shame your own craving for human connection. This is the damage most people don't see, not just the absence of love, but the erosion of your right to ask for it. And the longer you stay in the cycle, the more attached you become to the person who holds the key to your emotional oxygen. You mistake your longing for loyalty. You mistake your tension for love. You believe that one day they'll return consistently if you just stay quiet long enough. But they won't, because this is who they are, this is what they do, and this is how they keep you, not through closeness, but through the illusion of its return. You deserve connection that does not disappear when it's inconvenient. You deserve to express without being punished. You deserve warmth that is consistent, not doled out like currency. And if your emotional presence is met with emotional absence, you're not in a relationship. You're in an emotional economy where silence is currency. Don't negotiate with starvation. Don't justify emotional drought. Don't call their absence a misunderstanding when it's a mechanism of power. Your voice is not too loud. Your feelings are not too much. Your needs are not negotiable, because love should never require you to abandon yourself just to keep someone near. And when you begin to reclaim your emotional truth, when you begin to name their silence for what it is, they may try something else. They may cry, they may collapse, they may fall into victimhood, rewriting the story to make you the threat. And that shift is not compassion, it's camouflage. It is a new tactic, wearing the mask of hurt. So remain still, because the very next shadow you face will be softer, sadder, but far more deceptive. Victim mask. Playing innocent to control your sympathy. It doesn't start with blame. It starts with a story, a subtle shift in narrative, an innocent tone, a wounded look, and suddenly you're comforting the very person who caused your pain. This is not misunderstanding. It's manipulation. It is the weaponization of vulnerability, a tactic that wraps itself in pity so you forget to question the damage. The victim mask is one of the most deceptive tools in dark psychology because it hides control inside compassion. They don't dominate, they derail, they don't attack, they collapse. Instead of answering your pain, they present their own. Instead of taking accountability, they shift attention. And instead of harming you openly, they disarm you silently through your own empathy. They tell half-truths wrapped in emotion. They cry without clarity. They flinch without being touched. The mask is not just for you, it's for anyone watching. They want to be seen as the misunderstood one, the fragile one, the one who was just trying. But beneath the trembling voice lies strategy. They know sympathy will shield them from scrutiny. They know your compassion can be turned inward against yourself. You start believing you've been too hard on them. You stop asking for clarity. You suppress your needs, fearing you'll trigger them again. And in your silence, they find shelter. What looks like injury is influence. What sounds like sorrow is structure. What feels like innocence is inversion. A common example unfolds in personal relationships, where accountability should create repair. You express hurt, they sigh, lower their eyes, and whisper, "I guess I can't do anything right." The conversation is no longer about your pain, it's about their disappointment in themselves. But their self-blame isn't real, it's rhetorical, a defense cloaked in despair. You're no longer allowed to feel what you feel, because now they are the ones who are hurting. You apologize for confronting them, you comfort them for letting you down. You become the caretaker of your own mistreatment. This is how power flips without a word. In Dallas, a nurse named Elaine, 42, was engaged to a man who would often disappear for days without explanation. Each time she confronted him, he responded with stories of his childhood about how being questioned made him feel abandoned. Instead of answering her, he told her how her tone brought back trauma. Elaine stopped asking where he went. She began whispering her feelings. She told herself she was being considerate, but she was being silenced by a man who knew that suffering could become a shield. The mask is effective because it uses truth as camouflage. Yes, people have trauma. Yes, people hurt. But pain is not a free pass to harm others, and suffering doesn't excuse strategy. There is a difference between being hurt and using hurt to avoid responsibility. The victim mask exploits that line. It creates a moral inversion. You begin to feel guilty for expecting decency. You feel selfish for needing repair. You're taught that pointing out mistreatment is cruelty, and standing up for yourself becomes a form of abuse. Over time, you adopt the language of their defense. I'm sorry for how I said it. I know I can be intense. I'll try to be more patient. But the real crime isn't in how you said it. It's that you dared to say it at all. The mask works best in moments of confrontation. When they feel cornered, they don't argue. They collapse. They play overwhelmed. They weaponize fragility. Suddenly the room becomes about their sadness, their anxiety, their brokenness. It's a deflection wrapped in softness, and the more sensitive you are, the better it works. Because it's not your logic they're targeting, it's your empathy. They don't need to win the argument, they only need to reframe it. You end up soothing the storm that came from their own thunder. In San Diego, a 29-year-old teacher named James found himself walking on emotional glass with his partner. Whenever he brought up issues, her lying, her deflections, she'd cry, talk about her exes, describe her childhood abuse. James stopped pushing for the truth. He started tiptoeing. He convinced himself that her history was too painful to pressure, but what he didn't see was that her pain wasn't being healed. It was being used. Every tear turned accountability into an accusation. That is the power of the victim mask. It doesn't demand control, it earns it. You surrender your position not because you are wrong, but because you don't want to be cruel. This is how your emotional intelligence gets turned against you. You begin overcompensating. You rehearse your words before speaking. You pad every truth in soft layers. You anticipate their reaction before your own expression. You learn to censor not because you're wrong, but because they might feel wronged. And in that space of silence, they gain room to rewrite the story. You're no longer the one in pain. You're the one causing pain, even if the only thing you did was feel it. The brilliance of this mask is in how it protects the manipulator's image. While aggressors are seen and called out, victims are shielded. They receive grace, compassion, patience. So when the abuser plays the victim, they cloak themselves in all the protections designed to prevent harm. They invert the very systems meant to hold them accountable. They're not always dramatic. Sometimes they are soft, subtle, understated. The slight tremble in their voice, the long silence, the text that reads, "I didn't know I hurt you. I'm sorry, I always mess things up." You hesitate to push further. You feel like the bad one. And they never have to fix anything because they've already framed themselves as broken. This is not humility, it's escape. It's the exit ramp from consequences. And the more you fall into that emotional rescue role, the less likely you are to ever feel seen, heard, or healed. They don't want accountability, they want immunity. Over time, you begin expecting the mask. You hesitate to express even mild dissatisfaction, knowing the collapse will follow. And when it comes, you're not angry, you're exhausted, because you already know how the pattern ends. You feeling guilty for needing repair, you fixing what they broke, you staying quiet to avoid their spiral. This isn't communication, it's coercion. Dressed in sadness, wrapped in helplessness, built to dismantle your right to feel harmed. True accountability never collapses into self-pity. It stays present, it listens, it responds. But the victim mask doesn't listen, it performs. And every performance adds another brick to the wall between you and truth. Eventually you start to doubt your perception. Maybe I was harsh, maybe I should have waited, maybe they're just really fragile. But you're not confusing cruelty with truth. You're being conditioned to associate your needs with harm. That is the internal rewiring emotional manipulators depend on. They want you to flinch before every honest word. They want your empathy more alive than your boundaries. Because if you keep giving comfort, they'll never have to give clarity. This tactic spreads. Friends take their side because they seem so hurt. Colleagues sympathize because they're going through a lot. Even therapists can be manipulated if the performance is convincing enough, but the real victim isn't the loudest one in the room. It's the quiet one, sitting in self-blame, wondering if their truth is toxic. To unmask this tactic, you must stop being seduced by softness. Not all sadness is sincerity, not all emotion is integrity, and not all tears mean truth. Ask what changes, not what's shown. Does the behavior stop? Do boundaries begin to matter? Or does the mask come back whenever consequence appears? Patterns reveal what performances hide. The moment you stop feeding the collapse, the real person appears. They may rage, they may punish, they may leave, because without your rescue, they lose their leverage. Let them, because manipulation that hides in fragility is still manipulation. You don't owe anyone comfort while you're bleeding. You don't have to stay silent because they're sad. You are allowed to express harm even if they cry. You are allowed to ask for repair even if they struggle. You are allowed to hold space for yourself without guilt, because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone feels sorry for. And when you begin recognizing their helplessness as a mask, when you begin seeing performance instead of presence, you become dangerous to their illusion. And when the mask no longer works, they reach for something sharper, something colder, something with teeth. What happens next may seem like truth, but it's projection, and you'll need sharper eyes to see it coming. Projection, blaming you for their own darkness. You are not the thing they say you are, but they need you to believe it. They need to unload their hidden shadows, anger, guilt, shame, onto someone close, someone soft, someone accessible. They choose you because you carry their reflection without knowing it, because you absorb what they cannot admit, because they need a villain to keep their mask clean. This is projection, a transference of inner filth onto external fabric, a cycle that distorts the mirror and traps the target in blame that was never theirs. Projection isn't random, it's ritual, it's not a mistake, it's a method. Those who use it have learned to evacuate their discomfort by outsourcing it. They throw their fire into your lungs, then shame you for choking. They light a match in your name, then scream about the smoke. They cannot be the flawed one, so you must carry that weight. You feel it in subtle accusations. You're told you're too sensitive while they seethe inside. You're called manipulative as they twist the narrative. You're labeled selfish when you ask for reciprocity. But these words are not assessments. They're reflections, their own fears, hurled outward to keep self-awareness from touching skin. In a quiet suburb outside Minneapolis, 37-year-old Claudia spent years being told she was paranoid by her fiancé. He claimed her questions came from insecurity, but 2 months before their wedding, she discovered years of infidelity, secrets he had accused her of hiding. His guilt was too heavy, so he laid it on her shoulders. Every suspicion she raised was met with gaslight and shame, but it wasn't her paranoia, it was his projection. The closer you get to their truth, the louder they distort yours. This tactic breaks reality. It makes you doubt your integrity. It turns your compassion into confusion. You apologize for being too much. You hide your needs so they won't think you're demanding. You swallow your voice, afraid of being controlling. But these were never your qualities. They were theirs, cast onto you like a second skin, stitched with accusations. And the longer you wear it, the more you start to believe it fits. Projection is psychological camouflage. It hides their intentions by dressing you in them. They don't feel safe holding their own anger, so they name you as volatile. They don't want to admit their control, so they tell others you're possessive. They feel shame for their desires, so they label you as toxic. This inversion is the theater of dark psychology. It plays well to outsiders. To them, you're the cause, and they're the casualty, because they've rehearsed the performance, and you're left on stage without a script. There's a difference between feedback and projection. Feedback invites dialogue. Projection demands silence. Feedback speaks from a place of shared awareness. Projection speaks from a wound that refuses to close. When they accuse you of feelings they clearly embody. When they shame you for needs they deny in themselves. When they label your truth to escape their own, you are in the presence of projection, and the only way out is clarity. You cannot convince someone who has already built a false mirror. If they need you to be bad so they can feel good, they will twist your every move to match the image they've built. They don't want understanding, they want escape, so they make you the container for what they refuse to see. In Charleston, South Carolina, 31-year-old Malcolm was dating someone who called him emotionally unavailable weekly. But every time Malcolm opened up, she disappeared emotionally. When he expressed feelings, she shut down. When he stayed silent, she accused him. After a year, Malcolm realized the trap. Her abandonment was being projected onto him. She accused him of walls she had built. Her projection wasn't conscious, but it was devastating. In Charleston, South Carolina, 31-year-old Malcolm was dating someone who called him emotionally unavailable weekly. But every time Malcolm opened up, she disappeared emotionally. When he expressed feelings, she shut down. When he stayed silent, she accused him. After a year, Malcolm realized the trap. Her abandonment was being projected onto him. She accused him of walls she had built. Her projection wasn't conscious, but it was devastating. He spent months repairing an image that was never his to begin with. This is how projection warps the self. You start repairing damage that doesn't belong to you. You take accountability for behavior you never displayed. You learn to be small, not because you are wrong, but because they need you to feel like you are. The weapon is not in what they say. It's in the repetition, the constant whisper. You are the problem. The subtle message. Your emotions are the threat. The unspoken rule. You must adjust because I won't. And if you resist the label, they double down. They call you defensive. They say you're projecting. They say you're gaslighting them. This is called projection flipping. It's when the accuser defends themselves by accusing you of the very tactic they're using. It creates a psychological trapdoor. The more you defend your truth, the deeper you fall into theirs. You start shrinking, not to be safe, but to avoid blame. You become more agreeable, more quiet, more filtered, not because it's who you are, but because you're exhausted from being misunderstood on purpose. They project to protect their illusion, but you suffer to protect your peace. And that cost compounds. The illusion becomes identity. You question your memory. You second-guess your words. You fear your reflection because it's been shaped by someone else's shadow. And slowly, you lose the ability to recognize what's real. This is why projection is not just a tactic. It's psychological erosion. It doesn't break you suddenly. It wears you down, one mirrored accusation at a time, until you're not sure what parts of you are true and which were grafted onto your skin by someone who couldn't face themselves. They do this not because they hate you, but because they hate their own reflection, and you're the closest mirror, so they crack your surface, they blame the distortion, they walk away convinced it was your flaw all along. To survive projection, you must anchor in self-definition. You must know who you are, not just in words, but in spine. Because the louder they name your faults, the more rooted you must be in your truth. You cannot cleanse their shame. You cannot fix their fear. And you are not responsible for the feelings they fear to feel. Begin noting patterns. If every confrontation ends with you apologizing, look deeper. If you're always defending intentions you never had, pay attention. If you feel guilty for things you never did, pause. These are signals, not of your failure, but of projection. Call it internally. Don't argue. Don't explain. You cannot fight distortion with logic. You resist by refusal. Refusal to absorb, to believe, to shrink. Hold space for your own mirror, one that's clean, one that's yours. Even if others believe their version, you don't have to. Even if you're painted as the threat, you don't have to react. Even if you're left holding shame that doesn't belong to you, you can set it down, because ownership is not the same as projection, and guilt is not the same as truth. Let them keep the weight they cast. You're not required to carry it just because they can't. You will lose people when you stop accepting their distortions. You will be called things that hurt. You will be framed in stories that make you the villain, but the price of peace is often perception. And the reward of refusal is identity. Because when projection no longer works on you, they don't just lose control, they lose cover. And that forces them to choose, look within, or find another mirror. In that moment, they may shift tactics. They may become charming. They may turn soft. They may act wounded. But don't confuse adjustment with accountability, because projection can retreat, only to be replaced with something more seductive, and what's coming next will look like love, but it's conquest. Charm offensive, winning your trust before infiltrating your mind. Not every predator enters with a snarl. Some arrive with warmth, with generosity, with laughter, with connection. They learn your rhythms, mirror your values, echo your wounds. You mistake resonance for safety. You assume similarity means alignment. But this is not friendship. This is strategy. The charm offensive is not affection. It is camouflage. It's a calculated front, soft, sweet, well-timed, designed to slip past your intuition. It doesn't look like control. It feels like a gift. But behind the smile is a blueprint to access your defenses before they decide what to destroy. It begins with flattery, a consistent elevation of who you are. They call you rare. They say they've never met anyone like you. You feel seen in ways you've never known. You open. You share things you usually guard. You invite them into stories that built your identity. You believe their admiration is sincere. But the deeper truth is this: they aren't admiring. They're scanning. In Las Vegas, a 44-year-old real estate agent named Krista met someone through a mutual business circle. He was charismatic, remembered names, birthdays, and complimented her work relentlessly. He volunteered help with her listings. He introduced her to connections. Over 3 months, she trusted him enough to partner on an investment. 2 weeks later, he drained a shared account and vanished. The charm wasn't random. It was rehearsed. Krista wasn't chosen for her beauty or skill. She was chosen for her access. Her warmth was the entry, her trust, the target. This is the essence of the charm offensive. It isn't attraction, it's architecture. Charm isn't always romantic. It adapts. In work, it arrives as mentorship. In family, as protection. In friendships, as loyalty. But the pattern is the same. They come close with praise. They seek your comfort. They offer value quickly, and in return, they extract information, insights, vulnerabilities, leverage. The kindness is real enough to disarm, but calculated enough to control. You'll notice it in the rush. How quickly they move from strangers to soulmates. How fast they click with you. How intensely they want to be part of your world. It feels thrilling. It feels earned. But you didn't build this connection. It was built around you, constructed like scaffolding, so they can climb inside and rearrange your mind. This isn't manipulation in the obvious sense. There's no push, no insult, no denial. Instead, there's consistent praise, agreement, presence. It makes you believe they are safe. It makes you believe you've finally found someone who gets it. It lowers the gate. And that's the point, because once the charm has settled, they begin to ask for things, small requests, tiny permissions, favors that feel fair, until one day you're deep in loyalty to someone who no longer looks like the person you met. In Boulder, Colorado, 29-year-old university tech assistant Julian was approached by a senior faculty member who praised his innovation, championed his ideas, and offered mentorship. Within weeks, Julian was invited to meetings, trusted with sensitive projects, and promised advancement. 6 months later, when a conflict arose, the same mentor used Julian's ideas as leverage to block him from promotion. The access had been purchased with kindness. The trust became currency. The charm was never personal. It was a bridge to control. This is the betrayal of the charm offensive. It doesn't ask for force. It asks for belief. And once belief is secured, they own the narrative. By the time they shift, you're already loyal, already attached, already invested. So, when the mask drops, you blame yourself. You assume you missed something, that you were naive, that your trust was the flaw. But your flaw was only this: you thought their warmth was an end, not a means. This tactic is not about your weakness, it's about your strength. They choose targets with empathy, with vision, with dreams, because those are the minds worth influencing and the hearts worth manipulating. If you had nothing of value, they wouldn't invest so much charm. The offensive works because it follows a rhythm. 1. Praise. 2. Mimicry. 3. Vulnerability. 4. Access. 5. Control. And by the time you sense the shift, you've already aligned yourself. To pull away feels like betrayal. To question them feels disloyal. To assert a boundary feels cruel. This is by design. Their charm wasn't meant to connect. It was meant to bind. Notice the over-effort, The way they never forget important dates, the way they always side with your opinions, the way they finish your sentences. It feels ideal, but it's an echo chamber, and in that chamber, you slowly forget the sound of your own voice. Charm is meant to soften you. Soften your boundaries, soften your resistance, soften your discernment. It doesn't need to last. It only needs to get you past the gate. Once inside, the real tactic begins. Control is always quieter when trust is established first. This is not about never trusting again. It's about watching for the intention beneath attention. Healthy charm is slow, measured, non-invasive. Toxic charm is quick, sweeping, too good, too soon. The difference is pace and purpose. The charm offensive thrives on your hunger for recognition, for connection, for being understood, and it uses that hunger to build dependency, because once you believe they're your mirror, you stop protecting your depth. You open, you reveal, you give them the keys, and they walk straight to the vault. You may realize this too late, after the investment, after the entanglement, after your reputation has been woven into theirs. You'll wonder why others don't see it, why they still describe the person you first met, why you feel isolated in your experience. It's because the charm hasn't dropped for them, and it might never. Charmers don't hurt everyone, just the ones who get too close. Everyone else is left with the impression. You're left with the impact. And when you try to speak, it sounds bitter, it sounds jealous, it sounds ungrateful. This is how they protect the illusion, by making your pain seem unreasonable. The longer you wait to call it, the harder it becomes. Because you're not just escaping a manipulator, you're unraveling a version of yourself that formed in their reflection. It means admitting you were used, that the warmth wasn't real, that the friendship was a funnel. But truth is the only cure, even if it costs connection, even if it shatters your image of what you had, even if no one else sees it. You do, and that is enough. To move forward, redefine what connection means. Choose those who respect space, who listen more than they speak, who don't rush the closeness. Let go of the idea that intensity equals depth. Let go of the belief that familiarity is trust. Let go of the lie that speed proves sincerity. Real trust grows slowly. It earns its shape. It doesn't arrive fully formed. If someone is too charming, too agreeable, too fast, don't run, but pause. Watch their consistency. Watch their response to boundaries. Watch how they behave when you say no. Charm fades when it's performative. Integrity doesn't. What the charm offensive fears most is your stillness, your silence, your slowness, your steady refusal to be swept up. Because in that silence, you see the gaps, and in those gaps, the performance falls apart. You will be called cold. You will be told you're too guarded. You will be questioned for taking time, but better to be questioned for being careful than to be erased for being too open. You don't have to match their energy. You don't have to return every gesture. You don't owe your story to every smile. You are not rude for protecting your interior. You are not broken for being cautious. You are wise because you've learned some masks are made of gold, but what lies beneath is hunger. You can still be kind, still be warm, still be loving, just not blind, just not eager, just not swept. Let them earn the depth. Let time reveal their truth, because when charm is used as a weapon, only silence can disarm it. And when the warmth cools and the glow fades and the real agenda emerges, you won't be caught off guard. You'll be ready because you didn't just believe the performance, you observed it. And what comes next won't look like charm. It will come in smaller pieces, in softer signals, but its impact cuts deeper. False comparisons, making you feel less by measuring you against others. Comparison has always lived in the human mind. It whispers when we feel unsure. It stirs when we seek direction. But in the wrong hands, comparison becomes poison. Not all pain is created from insult. Sometimes it's shaped through subtle suggestion, a glance towards someone else, a pause before praise, a shift in attention that makes you wonder, am I not enough? This is the anatomy of false comparison. It's quiet, it's repetitive, it doesn't wound in one strike, it cuts in increments. The manipulator doesn't shout your inadequacy, they reflect it through others, they curate examples, they reference alternatives, They place you beside people you never agreed to compete with. And the game begins, a contest you never asked to enter, with rules you'll never fully understand, where the prize is simply not feeling small. False comparison is not always obvious. It may arrive in praise, but not for you. They highlight someone else's success. They admire another's discipline. They marvel at traits you lack, and you're left to absorb the subtext. You should be more like them. It doesn't matter whether the subject is real or imagined. The comparison is the weapon, and you are the surface it strikes. It happens over breakfast tables, in boardrooms, inside friendships, across romantic relationships. A mother remarks how neat your cousin keeps her home. A boss says your peer just gets things done faster. A partner mentions how effortlessly someone else handles stress. They may not say you're wrong. They don't need to. The suggestion does all the work, and you begin to shift, not toward improvement, but toward erasure. In Louisville, Kentucky, 38-year-old financial analyst Patrick noticed something unsettling. His manager regularly complimented another team member, praising her clarity, her speed, her natural leadership. Patrick, despite consistently strong results, was only acknowledged in contrast, not quite like Lisa, but still decent. Over time, his confidence decayed. He worked harder, longer, but the benchmark was always Lisa. It wasn't about recognition, it was about control. Patrick wasn't meant to thrive, he was meant to chase. This is what false comparison does. It manufactures pursuit without destination. The comparison isn't meant to help you grow, it's meant to destabilize, because a grounded person cannot be controlled, but one in constant self-questioning, they're ripe for influence. You lose touch with your own markers of success. You stop measuring from within. You let someone else define your worth, and they define it just out of reach. Manipulators who use comparison understand something vital. You will do more to close the gap than you will to feel whole. So they widen it, subtly, repeatedly. They talk about their ex and how together she was. They bring up a friend's partner and how supportive he seems. They mention a colleague's creativity. Only when you're feeling low. It's never direct. That's what makes it hard to name. But your nervous system knows. You tighten, you bend, you begin to shape yourself around the absence they keep pointing to. In Seattle, Washington, 41-year-old freelance designer Monica noticed her longtime friend had shifted tone. At first, it was small comments, how another friend had really matured, or how some people just know how to stay consistent. But over the months, Monica felt as if she were in a silent competition. Nothing she did was enough, and worse, she didn't even know the score. Eventually, she realized she wasn't being uplifted, she was being ranked. Comparison becomes manipulation when it's not shared in care, but used in silence, used to define your identity by contrast. This tactic is effective because it preys on a basic need, to feel seen. And when someone suggests you're not enough, you reach harder, you give more. You try to close the space between their admiration and yourself, but that space is not meant to close, it's maintained, because the moment you feel whole, you're no longer theirs to control. False comparisons aren't just about people, they can be about time. Remember how confident you used to be. You were so focused back then. You were more attractive when you were thinner. They rewind your identity. They anchor you to a version of yourself you can't return to. And in doing so, they fracture your present. You become fragmented, suspended between who you were and who they wish you were. This fracture becomes a lever, because when you feel you've lost something, you're easier to redirect. They offer new standards, they define new goals, they promise new approval. If you change, if you obey, if you align, and it feels like a solution, but it's not wholeness, it's compliance. The manipulator never compares you to inspire. They compare you to shrink, and what shrinks follows. What doubts obeys. What aches to feel enough will twist itself to fit whatever frame they offer. They don't want you to match the comparison. They want you to remain in pursuit, because pursuit is exhausting, and exhaustion leads to surrender. You stop questioning. You stop resisting. You stop seeing yourself clearly, and in that blur, they shape your identity, not with chains, but with contrast. It's a quiet theft of confidence, of clarity, of self-reference. You no longer ask, Do I feel right? You ask. Do I match them? Am I enough compared to her? Am I valuable when weighed beside him? Your worth becomes relative, not absolute, and that shift is where they win. But false comparison is not your failure. It's their strategy. You were never lacking. You were reframed. Your excellence was intact. They just redirected the spotlight, so it missed you on purpose. To protect yourself, return to origin, your standards, your values, your vision. Ground yourself in what you define as success, what you define as growth, what you define as truth. Let no one make you compete for your own identity. When someone consistently highlights others, pause. When they only praise you through contrast, question it. When their approval feels like a moving target, step back, because real respect doesn't pit you against anyone. It honors who you are, without revision, without measurement, without hidden curriculum. Be wary of those who weaponize admiration, who speak in subtle references, who plant seeds of not enough, then offer themselves as your solution. It's not mentorship, it's manipulation, because if they really wanted your growth, they'd never dim you to prove a point. You do not need to be anyone else. You are not improved through imitation. You do not become more real by becoming more similar. Their comparisons are not feedback, they are instruction, a code, written to direct your behavior toward a version of you that is easier to own. You don't have to play that game. You can walk away. You can refuse the scale. You can say, I measure by what matters to me, and they will call you arrogant. They will say you don't care. They will act as if you missed the lesson, but you didn't. You saw the game, and you chose your own field. Let them admire others, let them compare, let them create favorites, but don't let them shrink you to fit beside their chosen example. You are not built for their projection. You are not shaped to be shadow. You are full scale, full frame, already enough. And if you've been diminished, know this, that pain is not proof of your lack. It's evidence of your value. They wouldn't distort your image if you weren't already powerful. You were never meant to be anyone else. Comparison was the costume they chose for your erasure. You don't have to wear it anymore. And as your clarity returns, the next layer of manipulation reveals itself. A subtler form, sharper, rooted not in what they compare you to, but what they make you remember. Because soon, they won't point to others. They'll begin pointing at the past, rewriting the past, changing memories to maintain power. Memory is fragile, not because it is weak, but because it is shaped, stretched, smoothed, distorted by repetition, silence, and suggestion, and sometimes rewritten by those who need your truth to change. This is not forgetfulness. This is not nostalgia. This is calculated revision, where what you recall is edited scene by scene until you're left unsure if your pain ever happened at all. To manipulate the future, they begin by adjusting the past, not all at once, but in fragments, one sentence at a time, one doubt at a time, one reframed moment at a time. It's subtle at first. A detail is changed, a reaction minimized, a boundary you remember clearly, dismissed. You begin to question your recollection, and that's when the door opens, not to clarity, but to control. They ask, was it really that bad? They insist, you're being dramatic. They claim, that's not how it happened. And even if your body tenses with certainty, your mind begins to bend, because they say it with such confidence, as if the truth itself belongs to them. It's not just about denying your version, it's about replacing it so that theirs becomes yours, eventually. In Chicago, Illinois, 36-year-old speech therapist Amanda experienced a slow unraveling. Her partner frequently dismissed arguments that left her shaken. He'd later claim, we were just talking, or you overreacted like always. Over time, Amanda began keeping written notes after intense moments, just to confirm to herself later that they happened the way she remembered. But even then, she doubted her own tone, her words, her responses. The revision was working. She wasn't just losing arguments, she was losing her history. That's what this tactic erodes, your ability to stand on your own timeline. Manipulators rewrite the past, not just to confuse, but to disarm. Because if your memory can be questioned, your boundaries can be as well, and if your version is unreliable, then so are your needs, your reactions, your pain. You become an unreliable narrator, even to yourself. This is the next evolution of gaslighting, more refined, more internalized. They don't need to yell, They don't need to invalidate you outright. They just need to raise the question. They just need you to doubt the edges of what happened, because the moment you pause to ask, was it really that bad? You've already started rewriting it for them. It doesn't end in one moment. It happens across time, in repeated events that don't align with the feelings they allow. You cry, and they say you were cold. You speak up, and they say you were cruel. You stay silent, and they say you gave consent. Your lived experience is erased while their narrative takes its place. In Austin, Texas, 45-year-old Jeff endured years of covert psychological abuse in his marriage. After counseling, he began confronting the gaslighting he had normalized. But his partner deflected by correcting his memories. "You're misremembering again," she'd say. "I was only trying to help." Eventually, even in therapy, Jeff found himself saying, "I might be exaggerating, I'm not sure." His clarity had been turned against him. When they rewrite the past, you begin rewriting yourself. Memory is your foundation. It's the place you return to make sense of who you are, and when that foundation is altered, so is your sense of identity. That's the quiet devastation of this manipulation. It doesn't just shift facts, it shifts your emotional compass. You stop trusting your gut, you stop defending your pain, you stop asserting your version, because now it feels unsafe to remember. Rewriting the past can happen in many forms. It may be outright denial. They say it never happened, that you're lying, that your recollection is flawed, or it may come in alternative versions. They claim that's not how it happened. And even if your body tenses with certainty, your mind begins to bend, because they say it with such confidence, as if the truth itself belongs to them. It's not just about denying your version, it's about replacing it so that theirs becomes yours, eventually. In Chicago, Illinois, 36-year-old speech therapist Amanda experienced a slow unraveling. Her partner frequently dismissed arguments that left her shaken. He'd later claim, "We were just talking," or "You overreacted like always." Over time, Amanda began keeping written notes after intense moments, just to confirm to herself later that they happened the way she remembered. But even then, she doubted her own tone, her words, her responses. The revision was working. She wasn't just losing arguments, she was losing her history. That's what this tactic erodes, your ability to stand on your own timeline. Manipulators rewrite the past not just to confuse, but to disarm. Because if your memory can be questioned, your boundaries can be as well. And if your version is unreliable, then so are your needs, your reactions, your pain. You become an unreliable narrator, even to yourself. This is the next evolution of gaslighting, more refined, more internalized. They don't need to yell, they don't need to invalidate you outright, they just need to raise the question. They just need you to doubt the edges of what happened, because the moment you pause to ask, was it really that bad? You've already started rewriting it for them. It doesn't end in one moment. It happens across time, in repeated events that don't align with the feelings they allow. You cry, and they say you were cold. You speak up, and they say you were cruel. You stay silent, and they say you gave consent. Your lived experience is erased, while their narrative takes its place. In Austin, Texas, 45-year-old Jeff endured years of covert psychological abuse in his marriage. After counseling, he began confronting the gaslighting he had normalized, but his partner deflected by correcting his memories. "You're misremembering again," she'd say. "I was only trying to help." Eventually, even in therapy, Jeff found himself saying, "I might be exaggerating, I'm not sure." His clarity had been turned against him. When they rewrite the past, you begin rewriting yourself. Memory is your foundation. It's the place you return to make sense of who you are. And when that foundation is altered, so is your sense of identity. That's the quiet devastation of this manipulation. It doesn't just shift facts, it shifts your emotional compass. You stop trusting your gut, you stop defending your pain, you stop asserting your version, because now it feels unsafe to remember. Rewriting the past can happen in many forms. It may be outright denial. They say it never happened, that you're lying, that your recollection is flawed, or it may come in alternative versions, where they retell the story to others, casting themselves as the victim, you as the aggressor. Now you're not just gaslit, you're publicly recast. Another version is revision through justification. They admit the behavior, but minimize the context. I was under stress. You were distant. You provoked me. Suddenly, your pain is contextualized, but not validated. You're not allowed to hurt because their edited version comes with its own excuse. This tactic thrives in silence, when memories are not spoken, not documented, not named, because in silence details fade, and fading creates space for redefinition. That's why those who rewrite your past often discourage reflection. They dismiss your need to talk it out. They roll their eyes at journals. They grow irritated at your clarity, because your clarity is the threat. It interrupts their version. It prevents the edit. To control the story, they must control the record, so they question timestamps, they dispute tone, they twist intentions, they create emotional fog, and in that fog, they step forward as the only version that makes sense. Even if it hurts you, it's now the official version, and to push against it feels like betrayal. This manipulation is not just about ego, it's about permanence. Because once they rewrite the past, they rewrite the present, and the future is next. They anchor you to false interpretations so that future conflict is always filtered through their lens. You raise an issue, and they remind you of how you always twist things. You recall pain, and they correct your emotional reactions. Now, even when you feel harmed, you pause, not because it didn't happen, but because you no longer trust your own recall. But memory is not a monologue. It's not theirs to narrate. It is a collaboration, a mosaic of sensation, context, instinct, and your piece matters. Your fragment is enough, even if they disagree, even if they rewrite, even if they demand their version as the only truth. Your body remembers what your mind is taught to forget. Pay attention to the tension in your jaw when they begin rewriting. Notice the tightness in your chest when they dismiss what felt so real. Watch for the confusion that follows their corrections. That is not weakness. That is resistance. It is your internal system preserving truth while your external environment tries to replace it. The most dangerous revision is the one you begin doing to yourself. You downplay moments, you justify red flags, you insert excuses into your own pain, and now you don't even need them to gaslight you. You've internalized the script. But you can reclaim it. You can return to the scenes, not to dwell, but to re-anchor. You can say, I know how it felt. You can write it, speak it, keep it. Even if no one else agrees, your version is still real. You lived it. That's enough. To protect yourself from this tactic, document clearly. When something shakes you, record it, not to convince others, to remind yourself. Name the distortion. Call it what it is, not disagreement, not debate, rewriting. Refuse emotional bribery. When they offer closeness in exchange for silence, decline. You don't have to forget to be loved. This tactic hides behind charm, behind intelligence, even behind affection. But the intention is power, always, because if they can make you forget who they were, they can keep being who they are, and worse, they can keep you where you were, frozen, confused, malleable. But you are not erasable. Your memory is not fragile. It's sacred. Your truth is not inconvenient. It's yours. And the fact that they need it changed proves how powerful it is. Let their denial speak only for them. Let their corrections stay theirs. You are not required to agree with someone else's version of your own life. You do not owe harmony at the cost of your memory. You do not have to bend to their edits to keep their approval. You were there. You know what happened. That's enough. Because when truth is denied, it doesn't disappear. It burrows, it waits, it finds its way back through instinct, through pattern, through pain that repeats. And now that you see the pattern, you no longer have to replay it. Your past is not theirs to rewrite. Your story is not a draft. Your pain is not an opinion. You are the author. You are the witness. You are the one who knows. Hold that knowing like fire. Let it burn through the fog. Let it light what they tried to bury. Because soon, they won't just try to edit your past. They'll begin using your own words against you, not to understand, but to control. Personal information mining, using what you shared to break you later. They don't ask because they care. They ask because they're taking inventory of your fears, your grief, your regrets, of the places you break when no one is watching. At first, it feels like intimacy. the soft curiosity, the perfectly timed silence, the gentle space where your secrets feel safe to land. But beneath the surface, they are collecting, not to hold, but to weaponize. This tactic begins with comfort. They disarm you with attentiveness. They lean into your pauses. They echo your pain with a knowing nod. And soon you speak about your childhood, about betrayals, about that one night you've never told anyone, about your shame. They don't interrupt. They don't judge. They just listen. And in that silence, you open. But this silence is not sanctuary. It's surveillance. Information is currency in dark psychology, and the most valuable kind is the kind you'd never expect to be used against you. They mine it slowly, skillfully, like an archaeologist with infinite patience. They'll wait years if they must, because control is a long game. You don't notice the moment they switch, when your wounds become ammunition, when the things you thought were safe start showing up in arguments, thrown like darts. You always overreact, just like you said your mom did. No wonder you're insecure. You told me your ex cheated. Stop acting so sensitive. You already said you have abandonment issues. Now your own words have turned against you. In Los Angeles, California, 33-year-old Casey confided in her boyfriend about her struggles with self-worth after years of emotional neglect. Months later, during a disagreement, he coldly said, "You're acting like the broken girl you told me about." She froze. The pain was no longer just about the fight. It was about the betrayal of trust. This is the nature of psychological mining. They don't break in. You hand them the key. This isn't just manipulation, it's psychological espionage. They create a map of your emotional terrain, every scar, every silence, every abandoned part of you. And when control begins to slip, they strike where you're weakest, because they already know they were watching when you bled. They won't always use it directly. Sometimes it's a glance, a subtle reference, a quiet reminder that they know something sacred and that they can bring it up whenever they want. This implicit threat keeps you small, keeps you obedient, keeps you from fighting back, because how do you defend against someone who knows exactly where you're most afraid? In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 41-year-old David opened up to a close colleague about his struggles with his father's emotional abuse. Months later, during a workplace dispute, she casually said in front of others, "I guess you're just projecting that unresolved dad stuff again." David felt his insides collapse. The trust, the disclosure, the bond, they were all illusions. His truth had become a punchline. That's the hidden violence of this tactic. It doesn't just expose you, it shames you for being human. Not all personal information is stolen through questions. Sometimes it's drawn out during emotional highs. They'll create moments of false safety, encourage deep talks, engage in late-night vulnerability sessions, cry with you, share just enough of their own story to make you believe it's mutual. And once your defenses drop, you offer everything, your traumas, your fears, your unfiltered truths. What you don't see is the ledger forming in their mind, a record of power. This is the psychology of leverage. And when they need to break your resolve, to silence your boundaries, to make you stay, they'll reach into your past, not to understand you, but to use you against yourself. And because it came from you, the pain cuts deeper. There is no enemy to blame, only yourself for trusting. That's the most brutal twist. They turn your healing into your punishment. They often use your pain to justify their behavior. You're just clingy because your dad abandoned you. You're controlling because your last partner cheated. You have trust issues. You admitted that, remember? Suddenly, your past becomes the excuse for their cruelty, and worse, you begin to believe it. This tactic hijacks your self-awareness, what you shared to grow. They use to cage you. You try to explain, but they remind you of your broken parts and say, "This is just how you are. This is why no one stays. This is why I have to be this way." And now you're apologizing, not for what you did, but for who you are. This erosion is quiet. It doesn't come with shouting. It comes with familiarity. They know just the right words to make you feel seen, then suddenly ashamed. They don't need to insult you. They just need to repeat your truths with disgust. When they weaponize what you've shared, it becomes harder to open again, not just with them, with anyone. You begin to fear disclosure. You begin to filter your speech. You begin to protect your story, even in safe spaces, because you've learned not everyone who listens is listening to understand. Some are listening to store. The long-term impact is emotional isolation. You second-guess your trust. You question your own transparency. You wonder if it's safer to just stay silent. And when that silence takes root, they've won. Because now you're not just hiding from them, you're hiding from yourself. But their manipulation reveals more about them than it ever does about you. Because real connection doesn't catalog pain for future warfare. Real connection protects the sacred, holds it gently, guards it even in anger. Weaponizing trust is not love, it's surveillance dressed as intimacy. To defend yourself against this tactic, 1. Share slowly. Not everyone earns access to your inner world. Take your time. Observe their patterns. 2. Watch their reactions. Do they hold your truth with compassion, or do they flinch, shift, twist? 3. Set conversational boundaries. You don't owe every answer. You don't have to explain your scars. You don't need to fill silence with self-disclosure. 4. Notice patterns of recall. If they bring up your past in arguments, even subtly, it's a red flag. Your vulnerability is not a weapon. It's not a flaw. It's not a tool for someone else's control. It is sacred ground, and only those who treat it with reverence deserve to walk upon it. If they twist what you told them into something ugly, it says nothing about your story and everything about their intent. Don't rewrite yourself. Don't shrink your truth. Don't armor your past to make them comfortable. You were honest. That's not a weakness, that's strength. And the ones who exploit it, they fear that strength, so they try to poison it. But your truth is not theirs to distort. It was never a confession. It was a declaration that you are real and human and whole. They saw the power in that, so they tried to break it. But that story still belongs to you, even if they repeated it wrong. Healing doesn't mean closing up. It means choosing more carefully who you open to. It means listening for alignment, not just affection. It means asking not, do they care, but do they protect? Because anyone can ask you about your scars. Only the right ones will hold them without cutting deeper. When they use what you've shared to control how you behave, how you speak, or how you think, that's not intimacy, that's manipulation, wearing your voice. And the only way to take your voice back is to name it. This is not love, this is mining, and I will not be reduced to data in someone else's strategy. There is no shame in trusting the wrong person. There is only strength in learning to trust yourself again. And the more you trust your instincts, the harder it becomes for anyone to bend them. You are allowed to hold your story close, tight, safe. You are allowed to choose silence over extraction. You are allowed to speak on your terms, with your timing, to those who don't collect, but protect. And when they try again, with soft questions, patient tones, curious eyes, pause. Ask yourself, are they opening space or collecting access? Because the next tactic will feel even closer, even kinder, even safer, but the cost won't just be your past. It will be your permission, and what they'll take next isn't your story. It's your control. Micro-control, tiny limits that add up to total domination. It rarely starts with a demand. It starts with a suggestion, an innocent comment, a tiny shift, just enough to seem helpful, just enough to seem like they care. Maybe don't wear that. You don't need to see them again this week, do you? You should get some rest instead of going out. You sure that friend really supports you? One drop at a time, barely noticeable, barely sharp, but slowly it builds. And what feels like care is actually control, disguised in kindness. Micro-control is insidious because it doesn't need violence. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't slam doors. It doesn't force. It simply redirects, subtly, relentlessly, until you are no longer steering your own life. Every boundary is softly moved. Every decision is quietly questioned. Every preference is replaced with theirs. And because it happens so gradually, you don't notice you're fading, not all at once, but in pieces. The human brain adapts to patterns. It normalizes consistency. So when someone consistently nudges your choices, you begin to anticipate their needs before they even speak. You silence your voice preemptively, to avoid tension, to keep peace, to not feel the chill of disappointment. But peace built on self-erasure is not peace, it's slow erasure. In Austin, Texas, 28-year-old Riley started dating someone who gently suggested what shows they should watch, what meals they should try, and what outfits looked cuter. At first, it felt like connection. She thought they just shared good taste, but within months, she found herself avoiding her old music, hiding her favorite jackets, and texting friends less often, not because she was told to, but because she knew the pushback that would follow if she didn't. That's the quiet genius of microcontrol. It doesn't need orders. It just needs you to adapt. Each time you comply, a part of you shrinks. Each time you adjust, you become easier to direct. Each time you dismiss your gut feeling, you become easier to silence. And that's the goal, not to dominate you with force, but to wear you down with whispers. This control often hides behind smiles. I just want what's best for you. I'm only looking out for you. I didn't mean to upset you, I'm just being honest. The language sounds warm, but the outcome is cold. You begin doubting your own judgment. You second guess what you know to be true. You start asking for permission without realizing it. Sometimes it's not even spoken. It's a sigh when you make a choice, an eye roll when you name your preference, a silence that stretches too long after you stand up for yourself. These are punishments in disguise, invisible leashes that keep you in check. In Seattle, Washington, 37-year-old Marcus noticed how his partner would subtly discourage his hobbies. Whenever he planned to play guitar or go hiking, she'd respond with, "Oh, I just thought we'd spend time together." Or, "Are you really in the mood for that today?" No anger, no orders, just small, repeated signals that made him abandon the things that brought him joy. This is how autonomy dies, not with a scream, but with a suggestion. Microcontrol thrives on plausible deniability. They never directly stop you. They simply guide you in a different direction until you no longer choose freely. And if you call it out, you're told you're overreacting, that you're too sensitive, that they're just looking out for you. So you stay quiet, and the silence becomes a habit, and the habit becomes your life. The strategy is repetition. They repeat their opinions often enough that you start internalizing them as your own. You begin to think, maybe that dress is too loud. Maybe I shouldn't hang out with them anymore. Maybe I do spend too much money on things I enjoy. But those thoughts didn't originate from you. They were planted, watered, nurtured, until you couldn't tell the difference between your desires and their influence. Microcontrol often shows up in routines. They might manage your schedule, suggest better uses of your time, help you streamline your day, and suddenly you're on their clock, living their version of your life. You eat what they prefer, you sleep when they want to, you speak in ways that don't make them uncomfortable, and you think this is compromise. But it's not. True compromise involves mutual respect. Microcontrol disguises one-sided compliance as teamwork. One of the most damaging effects of microcontrol is identity erosion. The longer it continues, the more you forget what you like, what you want, what makes you feel alive. You start relying on them for direction. You pause before speaking, not out of respect, but out of fear that your truth will become a target. This is psychological starvation. You are fed just enough approval to stay, but never enough freedom to grow. You begin monitoring yourself. You edit your language, you shrink your voice, and even when you're alone, you still hear their judgments in your own thoughts. Microcontrol is not about big rules. It's about small limits. It's not, you can't go out. It's, are you sure you should go out tonight? It's not, don't wear that. It's, you'd look better in something else. It's not, you're not allowed to see them. It's, they've always seemed jealous of you. Each time you shift course to avoid their subtle disapproval, you lose another inch of your autonomy. To reclaim yourself from this grip, you must first notice the pattern. 1. Track the shifts. What did you used to do, say, wear, enjoy before their influence? 2. Name the hesitation. Are your current choices yours or reactions to someone else's expectations? 3. Rebuild your inner voice. It has been quieted, not destroyed. You still know what you love. You just need to listen again. 4. Assert without apology. They will test your boundaries. They will disguise it as concern. Stand firm, not in anger, but in clarity. You are not selfish for wanting your own life. You are not rude for choosing your own rhythms. You are not wrong for saying no to tiny cages built from caring words. True partnership doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. It feels like walking freely, even when the other doesn't understand. It allows difference. It respects autonomy. It doesn't demand small edits to make one person more comfortable. Microcontrol often leaves no visible marks, which is why it's so hard to name, so hard to explain, so hard to leave. But the absence of bruises does not mean the absence of harm. You don't need to wait for it to become overt. The subtle is enough. Your discomfort is enough. Your intuition is enough. You are not difficult. You are not too much. You are not a project to be improved. You are a sovereign human being whose choices are valid, even when they are different from what someone else wants. There will be times when asserting yourself feels like conflict. That's not because you're being unkind. It's because someone has grown used to you being silent. But your silence is not your value. Your compliance is not your love. And their comfort is not your responsibility. You are allowed to wear what you want, to see who you want, to speak how you want, to live on your terms, without guilt, without shrinking, without permission. They will say, "But I just care." They always do. Let them care without caging. If their concern demands control, it's not concern, it's strategy. And you don't need to justify why you're taking your life back. Your freedom is not loud. It begins in small acts, like choosing your own clothes again, calling that friend again, playing your favorite music out loud, laughing without censor. Each one is a reclaiming. Each one is proof that you still exist beneath the edits. This isn't about rebellion. It's about returning to the version of you who didn't second-guess every joy, who didn't whisper their wants, who didn't flinch at their own reflection. That version of you is still here, waiting, listening, ready. And soon, what you'll face next won't be a suggestion or a shift. It will be something deeper, something crafted to rewrite memory itself. What you'll uncover will demand more than resistance. It will ask you to trust what you once knew, even when they've tried to rewrite it. Final exit. How to recognize, resist, and reclaim your mind. You feel it first as fatigue, not in the body, but the soul. A slow erasure. A subtle silence behind your thoughts, like a hush that isn't peace but pressure. The space around you shrinks but not visibly. It's in how you're allowed to speak, think, choose. You begin to move like a puppet, remembering it once had limbs of its own. This is what it feels like when the trap nears its final form. Every manipulation tactic, every silent punishment, false promise, and twisted reflection has always served this one goal: to make you doubt yourself so profoundly that your reality collapses and theirs replaces it. But now, this is the moment the cycle turns inward. The final manipulation doesn't demand your compliance. It requires your surrender. The most dangerous moment isn't when you're being attacked. It's when you stop noticing. It's when you laugh, even though you're dying inside. When you nod, just to keep the noise down. When your boundaries become memories. It's when you no longer fight the manipulation because you've accepted it as normal. That is why the final chapter isn't a strategy, it's a reckoning. Because you are no longer merely escaping someone else's darkness, you're facing what they've planted inside of you. You start by recognizing that no healing ever begins in the same room where harm was normalized. You cannot grow in poisoned ground, and you cannot reclaim your mind in an environment that constantly feeds your self-doubt. The first exit isn't physical, it's mental. You have to believe, deeply, relentlessly, that the version of you they sold you was a lie. Emotional intelligence becomes your first weapon, not just reading others, but reading yourself. What triggers shame in you? Whose voice is behind that hesitation before you speak? Whose approval are you still chasing, even in silence? In a 2021 study from Chicago, a group of survivors of long-term emotional manipulation were asked when they knew they had to leave. The most common answer wasn't the worst abuse. It was the moment they realized they were becoming someone they didn't recognize. That moment isn't loud. It's quiet, like fog lifting from the mind. It's the first whisper of your true self returning from exile. The danger is real, though, because manipulators sense the shift. They feel your mind retracting its leash. That's when they double down. Promises of change, tears they never cried before, apologies that sound like hope but are baited hooks. This is the final Hoover. And if you go back now, you won't just lose yourself again. You'll bury the part of you that believed in the escape. That's why the next step is resistance, not loud defiance, not visible rage. Real resistance happens in the rewiring of thought. It's when you no longer accept their framing of events. When you begin to narrate your life from your voice, when their shame doesn't land and their guilt doesn't take root. It's when silence becomes power instead of punishment. In Los Angeles, a woman named Aria shared her story online. For years, she was told she was too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult to love. She began recording herself, not just conversations, but private thoughts. She played them back to hear what she sounded like when she wasn't performing for someone else's comfort. That audio became her proof, her map back to herself. Resisting doesn't mean confrontation, it means collection. You gather pieces of truth no matter how small. You collect moments where your instincts were right. You list the times your gut whispered no and they talked you into yes. These aren't memories, they are evidence, and evidence is what dismantles delusion. Protection becomes the architecture of your mind. You start building internal gates. The first gate is time. You no longer reply immediately. You pause. You create distance in every interaction. Even seconds of silence buy you space to feel, to decide. The second gate is questioning. Instead of accepting what's said, you interrogate it. Who benefits from this narrative? What emotion is this statement designed to elicit in me? Manipulation thrives on unexamined emotion, but your analysis breaks the spell. The third gate is boundary enforcement, not by threats, but by withdrawal. You no longer argue your worth. You exit conversations. You decline invitations. You leave unread, unseen, unbothered. You stop proving and start preserving. And then comes reclamation. Reclamation doesn't look heroic. It's quiet, messy, non-linear. It's crying on a kitchen floor at midnight because you finally feel again. It's sitting in a parked car too long because silence no longer terrifies you. It's rediscovering your voice and hearing it tremble. But speak anyway. You will grieve the version of you that stayed too long, but you will also grow to love them because they survived, they endured, and they left when they finally could. Forgiveness is not necessary. Understanding is. You begin to understand how manipulation doesn't start in one relationship. It begins in childhood, in society, in cultural scripts that taught you endurance over expression, silence over confrontation. Reclaiming your mind means rewriting those scripts. It means deciding that peace is not bought by submission. It is claimed by truth. Some days you will still doubt. That's not failure. That's residue. That's trauma echoing. But now you have the tools. You know how to ground yourself. You know the feeling of your breath when it's not held hostage by someone else's mood. In Boston, a man named Elijah started therapy after ending a 7-year emotionally abusive relationship. He described it as waking up with borrowed thoughts. He journaled every morning, not what he felt, but what he believed. I believe I deserve safety. I believe silence is not a crime. I believe being loved shouldn't feel like strategy. Over months, belief became baseline, and eventually, the borrowed thoughts stopped knocking. That is how you reclaim your mind. It's not a single act, it's a ritual, a daily choice to come back to yourself, to stay loyal to your voice, to listen more to your intuition than to the memory of someone else's disapproval. And in time, you will find yourself speaking freely, laughing without fear, saying no and not explaining, being alone and not feeling abandoned, loving and not losing yourself in the process. This isn't about them anymore. This is about you returning to the sovereign space of your own mind, fully, finally, and without apology. You have seen the machinery of manipulation. You have walked the corridors of control. You've studied the shadows and traced the strategies. You now understand how emotional intelligence can be turned into a weapon and how to hold it as a shield. You are no longer vulnerable in the same way, because now your awareness is your armor. You will recognize the signs, the love that arrives too fast, the silence that punishes, the compliments that cut beneath the surface. You will sense when you're being mirrored, compared, measured. You'll feel it in your nervous system, and you will not stay. You are not who you were. You are who you reclaimed. You are not the silence they forced. You are the sound of survival finding its way back into voice. There is no perfect ending, but there is a beginning inside of every boundary you now keep. The final exit is not an escape. It is a return to the self, the soul, and the sound of your own name spoken with reverence. And as you step forward into spaces where manipulation no longer makes the rules, remember, they never broke you. They never owned you. They only delayed your arrival. But you are here now, awake, anchored, and absolutely untouchable. This is where the noise ends and the knowing begins. And just when you think you've seen it all, just when you feel the silence stretch into peace, you'll meet something else. Not a tactic this time, something deeper, something older, the hidden root beneath every shadow you've ever traced. It will demand even more from you, but now you know how to see. The recall, keeping the patterns alive inside you. It doesn't matter what you've heard before. What matters is what stays with you when the noise dies down. That silence, where you sit with yourself unguarded, is where this truth needs to live. You didn't come this far to forget. You didn't survive manipulation just to drift back into the same traps you escaped. You came to remember, and remembering doesn't mean keeping facts in your head. It means feeling them in your bones, sensing the danger before it speaks, knowing the pattern before it completes. Darkness doesn't knock twice. It slips back in when the lights are off. You must become the keeper of your own vigilance. The pull of old habits is seductive, not because they were comfortable, but because they were familiar. The brain, when deprived of chaos, searches for it in subtler forms. This is why awareness is not a one-time event. It is a discipline, a pattern of pattern recognition. They conditioned you to doubt your instincts. They built walls around your natural warning systems and painted them as overreactions. Every time you sensed something wrong and second-guessed yourself, the program deepened. Now, undoing it will feel like standing still in a storm, but that stillness is power. That calm refusal to be provoked is the new you. You are not here to learn more tricks. You are here to burn the blueprint into your awareness so deeply that you cannot be deceived again. You must begin with observation, not of others, but of the energy they bring into a space. Words are no longer your compass. Posture, silence, inconsistencies, the way someone leans too far into flattery or disappears after you speak truth. These are the breadcrumbs that manipulation leaves behind. A person who truly sees you does not need to convince you of it. They won't rush connection. They won't manufacture urgency. They'll let the connection breathe. False closeness always gasps for attention. It's in the way they push past your comfort and call it love. What you need now is not more knowledge, but the ability to internalize what you already know. Knowledge isn't power until it becomes instinct. Until you don't think before you recognize deception, you just see it, feel it, and walk away. Think of your subconscious as the final gatekeeper. Your conscious mind might be distracted, but your body knows, your nervous system knows. If your chest tightens or your breath shortens around someone, don't negotiate it away. The body doesn't lie, even when words do. Now, trace the patterns. The same ones that tried to convince you that love was earned through suffering, that peace was something given to you, not something you could claim on your own. These false scripts must be burned completely. To keep this alive in real life, do not wait for major betrayals. They rarely start there. Notice how often people dodge accountability, how often they tell stories that place themselves as the victim without ever taking ownership. Notice how they respond to your silence. Manipulators fear your quiet more than your rage, because silence is control and they cannot manipulate what they cannot provoke. Create rituals that reinforce your truth. Whisper it back to yourself when doubt begins to rise. You're not here to be convinced. You're here to recognize. Repetition is how they broke you. Repetition is how you reclaim yourself. Practice micro-awareness. If a conversation leaves you feeling smaller, drained, or unsure, dissect it. Reverse engineer it. What part of you did they aim for? What tactic did they use? Charm, guilt, withholding, projection. Each one leaves a fingerprint. Collect them. Don't rely on memory, rely on training. In high-pressure moments, memory fails. Conditioning takes over, so condition yourself differently. Flood your system with reminders of your worth, your clarity, your quiet power. Whisper it so often that no outside voice can override it. You are not rebuilding trust in others, you're rebuilding it in yourself. That is the final gate. The deepest manipulation was never external. It was always the lie that you needed them to see your worth in order to feel it. But their sight was always fogged by agenda. You've cleared the lens now. Keep it clean. How? Keep the list alive, not the list of names, the list of behaviors, because manipulators change masks, but never methods. They may show up in different skins, but they always use the same patterns: intensity, confusion, shifting blame, emotional starvation, micro-punishments, false peace offerings. Build your inner signal system. Red flag isn't a metaphor, it should be a physical feeling. If your stomach tightens, trust it. If someone's story changes on the second telling, note it. If someone rushes closeness, take space. Not everyone who offers warmth is offering safety. Let's go deeper. You now carry insight that others may not understand. That's your edge, but also your burden. Don't dilute yourself to fit back into places that require blindness. Protect your clarity like oxygen. Surround yourself with minds that sharpen yours, not ones that dull your edges. The temptation will come to forgive too fast, to make peace with distortion, just because confrontation feels like friction. But peace without boundaries is just surrender. You're not here to be agreeable, you're here to be real. Anchor into solitude without loneliness. That is the quiet strength manipulators cannot penetrate. The person who knows they are enough needs no validation. They become invisible to control. Practice psychological minimalism. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts. Guard your mental space like sacred ground. Manipulators only work when they're allowed to plant confusion in your soil. Starve them of that soil. Each day, reground your awareness in 4 truths. 1. Silence reveals. 2. Intensity masks intention. 3. Consistency over charm. 4. Energy before words. If someone's presence leaves you feeling erased, pause. If someone's approval feels transactional, step back. If someone's attention only shows up after your silence, observe. These are all rehearsals for larger betrayals. You are learning the long game now. Not how to respond in the moment, but how to prepare in the shadows. This isn't paranoia. This is precision, strategic stillness, calm pattern detection. That's what they never expected from you. They prepared for your reactions, not your refusal to engage. Write your awareness in ink, not pencil. Revisit it. Repeat it. When self-doubt knocks, don't answer. Let it pass through. You've already outgrown the cage they built for you. From now on, make observation your superpower. You don't need to react. You just need to record. Manipulators fear being seen clearly. When you see clearly, their power dissolves. So how do you make it last? You create a system, a private one, a daily, ritualistic return to truth. No excuses. Every morning, remind yourself, today I see, today I hold the mirror. It sounds small, but over time, it becomes armor. And when the world distracts you with noise, come back to stillness. Manipulation thrives in chaos. You thrive in calm. Stop trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That was their game. That's how they fed doubt into your bloodstream. But clarity is quiet. It doesn't argue. It observes, it exits, it heals. You are not here to fix others. You are here to become unfixable by them. And if the past tries to return, whether through nostalgia, guilt, or fake closure, remember, their need to return has nothing to do with love. It has everything to do with access. You don't owe your peace to anyone who once profited from your confusion, so keep this with you, not as fear, but as wisdom, not as armor, but as vision, not to isolate you, but to liberate you. You've stepped out of a fog that millions still wander through. That awareness is sacred. Carry it with reverence. You're not broken, you're rebuilt, and no one will break what you've rebuilt with this kind of awareness. Your intuition is no longer optional. It is now your first language. Speak it fluently, honor it instinctively. Let it be louder than charm, louder than apologies, louder than promises. You don't need more time. You need more presence. Start living from that, from the center of your clear mind, from the pulse of your remembered self. Keep watching, keep recognizing, keep refusing. And when you forget, return here. This voice, this reminder, this awareness, etched in silence, sealed in clarity. It's yours now. Let them underestimate you. Let them assume you've softened, because you have, but not into fragility. You've softened into precision, into power that does not need to scream, into a silence that cannot be manipulated. You are not who you were when this started. You are not their puppet. You are not their mirror. You are your own. And now you remember what they hoped you'd forget. That when you truly see them, you set yourself free. So if you've felt something awaken here, hold it. Don't let it drift. Don't let it fade. Make this the moment you commit, deeply, emotionally, fully. Subscribe, not just to follow, but to return to this truth whenever the fog creeps in. Let this voice anchor you. Let this awareness surround you. You survived for a reason. Now you stay awake for a purpose. The next time you listen, what you'll uncover won't just sharpen your eyes, it will protect your soul.